and tweet in a bit. And we are live. We should be live right now. So we can check the streams, and this is our
millions of people are already tuned in, I'm sure.
Yeah, so let's we should be showing up at the top of Twitter, but we should also like post the updated stream kind of in a bit. So I'm gonna post these updated streams on Twitter.
All right, my wife is in the audience, so we've got at least one viewer.
Awesome. There we go. We are live, and quote post updated stream. It's AGI Complete is getting a call or stream working 100% of the time.
Seriously, that's
We are not up on stage yet, so I'm going to add us on stage. Here we go. Oh, we are up on stage, and my screen is up on stage too. It's 8:53 a.m. And this morning, I think what's happening in AI news this morning. The market is generally down. NVIDIA stock price is at 174, which knocks off like, I don't know, like at this point, like $100 billion. The swings in NVIDIA stock are the size of small nations at this point. It's really, really amazing. And I guess, the Wall Street view right now is everyone has made a lot of money this year. I think people have made hundreds of billions of dollars, and people are just switched off. I think bonuses have already been calculated. I used to know people who on the trading floor who, if they had a very good year and they made their bonus target in February, they would just take the rest of the year off because there's no point in risking the bonus by trading more. And I can only imagine this year with even retail traders doing like 100%, 200% returns. I can only imagine, that everyone on Wall Street is just switched off already. So we have, I think, very low volume markets, relatively low volume markets. And no one wants to take on additional risk in the last few days of the year and wreck their book. And so I think we have a bunch of algo traders who are just squeezing everyone. So if you are a leveraged investor right now, you are feeling the pain because you are kind of long-term, leveraged into the close, and they are just stealing your money from you right now. But my sense is that once we turn, to the new year, we will get vastly better, vastly higher markets as earnings start to come in. Our first guest. So Nathan, this is the first time we're doing this. So
somebody who is taking a risk. A couple of people are you and me today. The first ever live show with a year-end retrospective and 2026 look ahead. It'll be interesting to try this format. I'm really one of the big reasons I've been interested in doing this is, when obviously everything is getting sort of noisier and noisier, right? A couple of years ago, I set out for myself this idea of being the AI scout and hopefully having no major blind spots in the AI landscape. That is becoming basically impossible with everything going vertical and AI touching everything, and even just your comments on the market there, reflect the fact that there's plenty of things that I'm not paying as much attention to as I might. But what do we do about this, right? As everything kind of gets noisier and noisier, and there's all these intersection points. One thought that I've had, and kind of mantra I've tried to encourage others to adopt, is shorten your timelines and do anything you can to make your activities denser in time, more information dense. My wife, who's I think our first viewer in the audience, runs these weekend conferences. They had been, often like once a year in a location. And so, for her, I was like, could that be twice a year in a location, but only one day? Is there any way to sort of increase frequency and make things more dense. And so the big way I think about today's experiment is obviously there's no, timeline shorter than live. And instead of doing an hour and a half or whatever with one guest and going, comprehensively, sometimes described as a forced march through their worldview, we can try to do the 20-minute version, get, as much of the alpha as we can in a really short time, and then, give people 9 of those over a 3-hour time frame. And we'll see how it goes. I'm excited to find out.
And one of the things that one of the things that we were talking about as we put this together was also that sometimes a longer podcast is often a capstone to a body of work. And one of the things that struck me was that a lot of the people that we want to talk to are actually right in the middle of their life's work right now. And I kind of wanted to see whether we could get more frequent touches while things were happening, rather than relatively less frequent, capstone type, end of like their body of work kind of material. Really to kind of like just kind of capture this moment. I tweeted out yesterday, this is the end of the Anthropocene. We are at, I think in the last 2 weeks, it struck me. Last week, it struck me that real-time automated translation is here. So we have constructed a Tower of Babel within quick succession. We have automated translation on Twitter, meaning I see a lot of tweets which are non-English language, which are now going viral, and a lot of tweets which are English language going viral in other languages, and just this crossover. So people are starting to understand themselves from across the world. Immediately after I posted that, someone posted a Instagram video, and it's of this girl, talking about how she wants a particular kind of man and she doesn't want to wait anymore. And then in the middle of the video, it switches out and it's actually her speaking in Spanish. The Spanish part was the original. And Meta is now doing this automated translation where they automate and do the lip syncing for you. And so you have all of this content in other languages, which are now going to be auto-ported over to English and vice versa. At the same time, I had another friend who is putting together China archive translation. So China is now producing a lot of scientific papers, but many of them are in Chinese. And we have this issue that English papers get read in China, Chinese papers don't get read in like the English-speaking world. And so translation tech is now good enough that it can translate diagrams as well, which is one of the big drawbacks of translation tech earlier. So just within a week, kind of like, and the tech has been there for maybe like a month or so. The tech has gotten good enough that Gemini was good enough to do infographics and stuff like that. But just you can see that flip over point, like, that transition point between two eras, which has been, particularly fascinating for me. And I think our first guest is, very cogent. He's very sensitive to the fact that we are transitioning. Nathan, why don't you introduce Zvi?
Yeah, who better to comment on the possible end of the Anthropocene than Zvi Mowshowitz, who I think probably needs little introduction in this space because he's a prolific blogger and analyst, and really, puts out canonical assessments at a really remarkable pace of all the new model launches and the strategic landscape. So Zvi Mowshowitz, welcome to our experimental year-end live show.
I love it. We're live.
We're live. So to kick us off, and I think you're the perfect person to kick us off because you do have both this like super in the weeds, week by week, grind it out mindset, which is super important. And also, the ability to zoom out and really take stock of the big picture. I guess for starters, like we've got a discourse that is increasingly perplexing to me in terms of how fragmented it is. On the one hand, we do have this sort of, I think, increasingly credible idea that maybe we are at the end of the human era or the beginning of the end of it. And then at the same time, we've got these posts still going viral, like AGI is impossible because it's computation as a physical process or something. And, that's a pretty extreme case, but there's also just, still plenty of denialism. For starters, how would you assess the vast gulf between people who I would say like seem to get it and seem not to, although obviously that characterization would be disputed.
It is very hard to make a man understand something when his salary depends on not understanding it, and misinformation is demand driven, not supply driven, right? Like basically these people, for their own cognitive peace of mind, for their own narratives, for their own business plans, for their own everything, need to believe that AI is normal technology. Need to believe often that AI will never do anything else. They just want it to go away. They really, really badly want it to go away. Like lots and lots of people want this. And sometimes it's for business reasons, sometimes it's for disingenuous reasons, sometimes it's just to feel better. So what do? They just grasp onto whatever lets them tell that story, and they will repeat it endlessly. They will latch on to, every so often, someone will generate some study, some paper, some post, some hypothetical, some whatever. You see the same thing in the AI existential risk debates, right? The same thing in the safety debates, where you'll see the same exact arguments that we were debating back in 2006, often under completely different architectures, just trotted back up. 101 errors get made over and over again prominently. Like this week, Noah Smith put out, the AI, don't worry about AI, it'll just have a utility function which will self-modify to Wirehead. And then Tyler Cohen repeats this as if nobody has done any of the normal experiments or thought about humans or philosophy or any of the underlying logic of what's actually going on. We're still here, right? These people will just keep repeating the same things because that's the level of discourse at which people who aren't really in the weeds, who aren't trying to understand things, can ever tolerate. It's unfortunate, but the default for most people is to think, AI can do what it can currently do, that I know it can do, which is much less than what it can actually currently do, which is then much less than it can do with scaffolding and other inevitable things and people learning how to use it, that automatically 100% is going to happen regardless of what anybody does, which in turn is much less than what's going to happen when they actually keep releasing these new models and they keep advancing the frontier. And sometimes they, when they see an advance, they see a new thing happen and they adjust, and sometimes they don't. But the latest big thing was GPT-5, right? Because I joked on Twitter, but only half jokingly, that because the OpenAI can't get version numbers correct, and so they called 4.2 and 4.3 instead of calling 5.2 now we're selling H200s to China because the entire White House is managed to be convinced that AGI isn't coming anytime soon because the even numbered release was disappointing.
I think one of the things that strikes me is when does it stop becoming normal technology? Like what do you need to see in order to say, because at some point, I mean, I think it's easier to set a stake in the ground now, and then we can see ourselves go past it. Because if not, what ends up happening is that you end up this gradual descent where you don't notice that you're passing the threshold. So what do you think is that marker that marks this normal technology to non-normal technology threshold?
So to me, the non-normal technology is either recursive self-improvement, where the AI substantially advanced research and work into further AI in a way that causes it to, normally you'd have an S curve, normally you'd have it slow down unless you devoted orders of magnitude more resources. If that changes, then that would count. Or alternatively, if it starts to create mass unemployment or mass displacement, the situation where you take my job, and normally I would just move on to another job that gets opened up because we're wealthier and we have more technologies and we have more options, but the AI just immediately takes that job too because the AI can do pretty much everything. Then that also, to me, is not a normal technology anymore, in a different but also very important sense. But I'd also say that we're kind of pretty much there. Dean Ball made the assessment, I think it was yesterday, that Claude Code plus Claude Opus 4.5 is AGI. Because of just the quality of computer use and coding that it can do. And that's not what we traditionally mean by AGI, but the coding multiplier on the top AI people in the world is reported to be on the order of 2 to 3 times already. And for me, as a amateur programmer who mostly doesn't do it, it's more on the order of 10 to 100 times. Right? It's from you can't do these things at all to these things are worth doing casually just by asking because you can. So like, Twitter decided to nuke the ability on Twitter Pro to let you actually have a following list, follow the people who you follow and then see a chronological feed. They just like, screw the feed, it's gone. And what did I do? I didn't fret. I went to Claude, transferred all my followings to a list. 15 minutes later, problem solved. Because you can just do that now.
I think there's like three concepts kind of like interrelated there. One was the idea of technological unemployment.
Yeah.
One was the recursive self-improvement. And the other was really uplift of individuals. And I kind of see like the uplift of individuals kind of causing some of the technology, like unemployment. It's really not the AI which is causing unemployment, but it's really like the senior partner at the law firm who doesn't want to hire junior partners anymore because he doesn't need them because he's using AI because he's been uplifted, right? So in that case, does that just mean if you wait long enough, people reallocate to new jobs? Is it just a temporary bump, or is that,
Right. So the question is it right? The question is this a one-time productivity shock? Is it a one-time effect? In which case we will reallocate, everything will be fine, it will remain a normal technology, or will the uplift keep accelerating? Will you get more and more uplift, and will this happen faster than people can adjust? And we will just actually have use for less and less people. And also, does uplift transition into replacement, right? Does augmentation become automation? And I think that by default, absolutely it does in more and more places. And what you see augmentation precedes automation in many of these places, right? Like I can't code on, you start to see, okay, I can do this by coding as a human, and it's a lot of hard work. Okay, I can do this by coding, or I can the law firm can produce the report, but I have to guide the AI every step of the way. But some of these steps I can have the AI do them, and then I can check its work, and then but I have to still be bespoke. I have to understand what I'm looking at. I have to check it. And then slowly but surely you start checking less and less of it. You start automating more and more of it. And then at some point you realize, oh, I can just press a button and it does an hour of work, and then it becomes 2 hours of work. There's the famous meter graph of how long you can code. And then it becomes a day, and then it becomes a week, and then it becomes, oh, my entire job. I don't need an employee at all. It's not but that progresses. And again, if this stuff stalls out, you're dealing with a normal technology, right? If you have an S curve, no fixed multiplier within reason on people's productivity is going to be a transformative, non-normal technology. But if it keeps going, it will be. So that's what we still have to watch out for. But the primary reason why I raised the third segment of augmentation and uplift, right, that you pulled out, is because it directly causes the other two things, right, if it keeps going.
What would you need to see within the next year to tell you that this is actually happening?
So my intuitive answer is nothing. I'm already convinced. If we're just being frank about it. But in order to feel like I had a more convincing case, I would say you would start to see more ability to self-correct. You would start to see advances in particular, computer use in ways that you didn't feel like the thing was going to fall over flat at any given time, with sort of some crucial individual motions. But it's all very continuous, right? There's no specific point at which, in our experience, things go crazy until they suddenly do. If you have a certain specific point where you're like, oh, okay, now we're in the takeoff, now we're doing it, it'll be pretty hard to mistake, but also be way too late, right? And then we're trying to figure out what before that indicates it's going to happen. And I think that it's kind of you have a series of, people often talk about bottlenecks, right? You've got all these different bottlenecks that prevent you from going crazy because you move at the speed of the slowest ship in this production process. And then you see them get removed one by one, which provides some acceleration. And then when the last one goes, you go, when the last few go, you start to see massive speed ups. And so you start to see substantial, complex real world tasks, especially things that aren't just coding, where the AIs are increasingly able to automate them really well and able to do large periods of time's worth of work from people into bespoke environments. And that includes being able to have the AIs build the tools for you to do that. I think that one of the things that skeptics are very much missing is this idea that no, it doesn't have to be able to do this with a command out of the box. If a human understands the task and can describe the task, then now it can immediately create an app and a tool. And in fact, Claude Code, you can first have it build the tool, right? Vibe code the app, and then have it build a tool for itself to be able to use the app. And then it itself, like now you have had to give the AI 3 commands, but now with essentially like a couple of sentences of text being written into Claude Code plus time, Claude can use the thing.
How much emphasis do you place on continual learning? That's obviously been a huge part of the discourse recently, and I think it's going to be a big theme over the course of the next couple hours. It seems like, very long context and context stuffing still leaves people with a sense that something is missing. If you imagine the drop-in knowledge worker of the potentially not too distant future, a big part of what people I think intuitively imagine there is that this thing sort of absorbs a bunch of information up front and kind of gets the vibe of the place and how we do things around here. And then it can really sort of slot in, not as this like kind of generic AI that's good at everything, but is always a little bit out of the loop, but is, really plugged in the way that humans are. Does that feel to you like a big piece, or do you think people are overemphasizing that?
So I have several times been covering podcasts by Dwarkesh, in which point, he emphasizes continual learning. He's the continual learning is necessary champion of the world right now. And every time I start, my hands reach out to start and type, here's how I do it without continual learning. Here's the very simple set of things you do to effectively allow the AI to continuously learn without technically having continual learning. So, for example, we just heard that Claude Code can, you tell it, here's a thing that we want to be able to do on a regular basis. And here's how that thing works. Oh, okay, let me build an app. Let me build code that includes all the knowledge that you have told me about how this thing works implicitly in its logic, also with comments and notes, and then give me a tool to trigger this thing. And now I can do this thing the way you wanted to. I have continuously learned to do the thing. And now I can refer to the documentation. I can refer to the comments. I can figure this stuff out. I can pull it up on demand. How is this so different? And the joke always is, okay, that'll be $100 million a year, please. And then I'll solve your problem for you. But the real answer is it's all very obvious to me that this is just a skill issue. This is just nobody has tried that seriously to get around this. And yeah, if you want your AI to be able to learn new skills, be able to develop new tools and abilities continuously over time that are adapted to your situation, I think at Opus 4.5, we're at the point where like, this is kind of a prompt engineering skill issue. This is like very straightforwardly something that you can do without actually requiring anybody to build a generalizable new tool. And within the year, I would be shocked if, we didn't have models that make this pretty easy. Like, of course, Claude 5 is going to be, Opus 6 is going to have no trouble with this, right? Like, GPT-6 is not going to have this issue. This is silly.
So we're going to dig into that from a couple different angles coming up, but being mindful of time and hopefully staying roughly on schedule, I want to change gears just for the last 5 minutes here and kind of get your zoomed out sense of like where we are in the big picture. What's your latest PDOOM? Maybe a quick breakdown of like what the sources of PDOOM are. And then I'd love a brief live players roundup, and that starts with just like, who are the live players in your mind? And maybe a little, commentary on the most important ones.
Yeah, so I'll start with the live players because it's a bounded tech. So basically, there's 3 labs that I think matter far more than everybody else: OpenAI, Anthropic, and Google DeepMind. It historically was to me roughly in that order. I'm starting to wonder about that. Anthropic has been continuously impressing me. Anthropic is now at the top of Arena, which historically it never been able to, clearly without trying to in some sense. I think that's more important than people realize. But it's by far, most importantly, it's the best coding model, best coding environment by a lot of people's reports. It's the model I want to use day in and day out. And I have 5.2, and it just is not tempting me. And so, these players are all racing for different forms of the thing. OpenAI is trying to be a sort of consumer-facing company. They say they're going to pivot back to business, and they're still racing for super intelligence. But you can see where the hires and the culture are going. Anthropic is going straight for coding and ASI. Google is trying to do everything at once because different managers are trying to do different things and fighting with each other. It's a giant mess, but they have overwhelming advantages and resources, so never count them out. Also, like, they seem very far behind in the alignment race, in the sense that like Gemini 3 is very dangerously misaligned in various ways if it was actually scaled up or given any real responsibility or power. Whereas Opus 4.5 in the Sol document, I don't have time to go into it, but they kind of show us the way of like how you can do much better at current levels than we've done in the past. And that is part of what gives me hope. So like Gemini 3 substantially increased my PDOOM. Opus 4.5 significantly decreased my PDOOM. If you're not making continuous updates, even if you don't like verbalize them specifically, I think you're making a mistake. Things happen all the time. So in terms of the bigger picture, essentially, like on policy, we're basically playing defense. We have forces that are winning, that are trying to actively stop any attempt to do anything, rather than anybody attempting to do anything that would be particularly useful. We're trying to hold together what little we have on the federal government front and so on. We do have a lot of people who care about that, including in government, including in Congress, including in the bureaucracies. And I think we're doing a decent job of fighting defense, but we're pretty much, I think, in defensive mode until David Sacks is out of the White House. And I'm not sure what else we can hope for. I think he's the primary effective villain in this story. And then the states are doing some good. I think SB 53 and the RAISE Act are plausibly advance our situation there, but the real action is at the labs. I think we're in a world in which I think we are determined to be maximally without dignity, to try and lose relatively easy scenarios and still have things go haywire. But at the same time, I do think we've seen evidence that the technical situation is more hopeful than I would have thought more often. And the difficulty level is likely somewhat lower than I thought it was, especially like recently around the Sol document and around several other Anthropic research papers have shown that, at least in terms of the short and medium term of alignment, there seems to be basins you can aim at. There seems to be ways to get the models to effectively want to help you with these things. And that like this might be actually commercially highly viable because it leads to a better model that is better, that is more pleasant to use, that people want to use, that is more effective, that is actually better at giving you the things that you want. And so we can do the kind of race to the top that they've always wanted to do, Anthropic's always wanted to do, and force us in that direction. So I'm very hopeful on those fronts. But overall, I'd say we're still in a really terrible situation because, as you say, what's your breakdown of your PDOOM? Which of these various different ways things could go wrong do you think is most likely? And I think that's sort of the right perspective to think about it, is we don't have to dodge one particular thing. I think a lot of people who are like PDOOM is 0.1% or whatever, or think of it as, unless the specific narrow scenario happens, we're fine. That specific narrow scenario is unlikely, therefore we're fine. Whereas I'm thinking of it as everything is trying to kill you in some abstract sense, not like deliberately trying to kill you, but the dynamics of all the things are trying to lead to unsustainable situations that like humans don't survive in, or lead to very bad ends. And we have to navigate a lot of impossible difficulty level problems in order to get around it. Fundamentally, we have to align the models well enough in the medium term to then align the models in the longer term. And we have to solve for disempowerment along the way. And we have to solve for potential other concerns, including the reverse of all of these concerns. And it gets very complicated, but I'd say, breaking it down, my overall PDOOM is still in the 60 to 70% range. And I would say that the bulk of that operates through cognitive disempowerment style scenarios, because I think that just sort of automatically happens. But, I am, in that sense, like, it all gets tangled up, right? You get cognitive disempowerment when we fundamentally had an alignment failure. Also in the sense of like, if cognitive disempowerment is about to happen anyway, naturally, if we're going to hand the AI, like people talk about, is a rogue AI going to suddenly like take over or something? Well, if you're going to be handed power anyway, do you go rogue? Right? In some important sense, there's no real motivation to do that.
I detect both hope and hopelessness there. Zvi, I'm sorry to interrupt you, but we're going to dial off and have Greg Kamrat, who is actually going to talk about exactly the cognitive increase that they've seen over the past year. Thank you, Zvi, and we hope to have you back sometime soon if we do this again.
Yeah, I enjoyed it. I think it was good. Let's do it again. All right.
Cheers.
Thank you, Zvi.
All right.
Okay. Staying on time. Good job so far by us. Our next guest, welcome, Greg.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, excited to have this conversation. So Greg leads the ARC AGI Prize. And this is, again, for anybody who's obsessed with AI enough to tune into this, I think that needs little introduction. It's been a big year. I want to just kind of get into it from a few different angles, but maybe for starters, because I think one of the meta themes right now is like AI can do so many incredible things, right? We're seeing like open math problems solved and, meaningful contribution to the advance in science. And, my son has cancer and I've been using it just nonstop in triplicate in the hospital room to double check the doctor's work. And it's been amazing. And they are going step for step with the doctors. And so there's like all these, amazing accomplishments. But then there's still this sense that like something is missing. And I think you're, really focused on figuring out what exactly that is and what can be done to patch those gaps. For starters, could you maybe give us a little bit of a sense for like right now, as we sit here, close to the end of 2025, what are the sorts of things that are still easy for humans, but are hard for AIs, which is really, as I think about it, the sort of animating idea of the ARC AGI benchmark and the prize.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first of all, thank you very much for having me on here today. ARC AGI started with Francois Chollet's first benchmark in 2019. Excuse me. And he had a strong opinion about the definition of intelligence. And this is going to start to answer your question here, because that definition is a dividing line that shows us clearly the types of tasks that are easy for humans and hard for AI today. And that definition of intelligence was a systems, meaning a human or artificial, ability to learn new things. And so the types of tasks that we're seeing today, which are very easy for humans but are hard for AI, require learning. And I know you brought up continual learning earlier. I'm sure we'll get into more of that there. But our benchmark is almost like a meta benchmark in which we teach you something new at the question time. And then we see, did you learn that new thing that we just taught you? And so what we find is that humans are extremely good at this, and especially at being sample efficient with their learning. So they only need 2 or 3 examples for something, whereas AI can in general, AI can learn any one scoped domain given enough data, but that's not the efficiency that we're looking for here. So humans are extremely sample efficient. And so if we come up with problems that humans can do and AI cannot, we can then assert that AI cannot learn as efficiently as humans. And therefore, we don't yet have human level intelligence in our AI right now.
So part of me wants to preserve that advantage for as long as we can, but clearly the gap is shrinking. This is a great chart.
Yeah, this is the money chart. This is the 390 times improvement in cost efficiency for ARC AGI 1 over the course of 1 year. Can you talk a little bit about this one?
Yes, absolutely. So this was December 2024. We get an email from OpenAI that says, hey, ArcPrize, we have a new model we want to test. And at that point, 12 months ago, the highest score on ARC AGI 1, which is what we're looking at here, I need to go back and check, but it was in the 20 to 40% range. And then OpenAI, they say, hey, we have a model and we're claiming that it scores 87% on ARC AGI. So this is almost double the performance. We had never seen anything like this beforehand. And so we do what we do for all lab scores, and we did a verification. And that verification says, hey, you claim this on the public tasks that you have, but there's a risk of overfitting and there's a risk of leaking the answers to the models. So we have a holdout set of tasks that we'll do that if the score there corroborates what you have on public, then yes, this is a verified score. And so we did that. And what we noticed is that there was an absurd amount of tokens being used for that score performance that they had. And we asked, hey, how should we price these tokens? Because it was an unreleased model. And given the price that they had recommended to us, it came out something on the order of magnitude of $1,000 per task or something along those lines for what it was. And so, yes, the 87% was legit. It was an amazing score. There was clearly something impressive was going on with the model. It was very expensive for the tokens. Now, fast forward to about a week ago, we announced the results on GPT 5.2. And with that model, not only did it get comparable percentages, in fact, it beat it. It got 90%, but it was almost like we said, it was about 390 times cheaper per token than what we had just done last year, 12 months ago. So there's a lot of things that are going on here. The models are getting better. They're getting more efficient to serve. And we see that in the same performance being 390% cheap, or 390 times cheaper here.
Yeah, that's incredible. Maybe circle back to the large language models at the end. But I think one of the things that has been really cool to watch about the ARC prize, and you've got now ARC AGI 2 and ARC AGI 3 as well. And by the way, these are now, those scores that we just referenced are above the human performance, right? That human performance is what, like 80, 85?
What we do, so for every single ARC task is solvable by humans. So there's a million ways you could actually slice and dice this and cut this, but the main message across all these tasks is that 100% of the tasks have been solved by humans on them. So the 80-85%, I mean, like I said, you can slice and dice this many ways, but each one of these tasks is human doable. And that's what's interesting about ArcPrize and a lot of the benchmarks that we have. You may be talking to other benchmarks, you may see other ones on there, and they take a different approach of PhD plus problems. So harder and harder problems that are out of reach for common folks, right? And what we see, and you brought up this point earlier, is that there is superhuman performance on those benchmarks, but yet we don't have the economic transformation that one may expect by having this thing that can do PhD plus problems, right? And so, as I said in the beginning, ArcPrize is obsessed with problems that humans can do and AI cannot. And so we actually, for each one of our benchmarks, we go through and we test a panel of humans on each one of the tasks. And I'm happy to talk about what we're doing for V3 here, because we are going through insane lengths to go and do that. But every single one of the tasks is doable by, normal folks.
Let's come back to ARC AGI 3 in just a second.
Sure.
I wanted to spend a minute at least on sort of non-scaling of LLM chain of thought type approaches, because the prize has been quite effective in eliciting other kinds of approaches. There have been a lot of interesting approaches with scaffolding. There have been a lot of interesting approaches with smaller models, with various test time fine-tuning and other strategies there.
Yep.
What has stood out to you the most over the last year in terms of things that didn't necessarily require huge hyperscaler resources to do, that moved the needle and kind of brought new insights to the broader community?
Yeah, absolutely. So you outlined the three categories very well. So we see three categories of types of things that we test. Number one is going to be frontier models. Number two is going to be kind of like, we'll call it novel approaches, but not built on top of frontier models. And then number three is refinements. So going to number three, just very briefly, that's our refinement approaches. And so we've had a few public submissions this year from Poetic, from Jeremy Berman, from Eric Pang, who build you could call it a harness, but that's really doing a disservice to what they're doing there. But they're building on top of frontier models and doing amazing search, parallel calls, just going very, very deep into squeezing out more performance about these individual models. However, some of the most interesting performance that we get is actually on the one that you were just highlighting there. That's an example. It's called Tiny Recursion Model. What we saw in the beginning of the year was this model came out, and it was called Hierarchical Reasoning Model by I'm forgetting the author's name, so you have to apologize and maybe put it in the show notes a little bit later. But what we saw here is that they were taking a refinement approach, but with an extremely small model that came from here. And what's really interesting is TRM, which was built on top of HRM afterwards. Those were incredible different submissions that we saw. And in the papers that they were used for, they demonstrated the performance on three different data sets. Number one was Sudoku. Number two, I believe, was some sort of elementary maze. But then number three was ArcAGI. So we were very excited to have them use ArcAGI as the way that they wanted to communicate their performance on there. And I would go as far as to say is that if they didn't use ArcAGI to communicate the performance on there, then it wouldn't have had nearly as the same impact as just using Sudoku and a maze that comes on there from there. So we're seeing awesome performance from small models through the recursion method.
So ArcAGI is supposed to measure intelligence of a kind that, somewhat closer to the human conception of intelligence. Yet we have models which perform on their own and models which perform better with scaffolding. So does the intelligence live in the models or in the scaffolding?
Yeah.
Or is it the combination of the two? Is it, how does that work when you have the scaffolding adding so much in terms of intelligence?
Yeah, you bring up a great point, and one of my favorite places to cross-reference this was on a latent space pod with Noam. They asked him, do you think AGI will have a scaffold or will it not? And he was under the impression, and you'll want to go watch the source for this one, he was under the impression that no, AGI will not have a scaffold. I actually sit in a different camp that no, there's probably going to be scaffold around it. And I think this is one of those words where you can easily misalign what you mean by definitions. Like, what is a scaffold, for example, is when GPT 5.2 Pro, if they throw 10 different parallel reasoning chains and then they combine at the end for the best answer, is that a scaffold? Is that a scaffold just because it's on the model side? Does the developer need to do it? So I think that you can argue about definitions here, but it is in my opinion that our best baseline for what AGI will look like is going to be represented after what our only proof point of general intelligence is, which is the human brain. Does the human brain have scaffolding? Yeah, it has a bunch of different neurons that are connecting different parts of the brain. It has different sub pieces of the brain that specialize in different types of processes. So there's a scaffold in the brain. I find it very hard to believe that future AGI will not have a scaffold in and of itself. So when I see scaffolds that come around here, I don't discount them at all. I think that they are key pieces of what we'll eventually see.
There's also the one, I don't know if you mentioned this briefly, I didn't catch it, but there was the one model that had 7 million parameters and no data at all.
Mm-hmm.
That one stood out to me in research as like a real sort of left field curveball. And I kind of wonder, I'd be interested in your general commentary and insight into that and what it means. But my mind always goes to hybrid forms. I think these contests and benchmarks and papers, pure plays all over the place are always interesting in sort of highlighting something new.
Mm-hmm.
But I always try to keep in mind it's probably not going to be one extreme or the other, that we end up really engaging with as AGI, at some, perhaps not too distant point in the future. So I guess I'm interested in like any commentary you have on that sort of no data paradigm that did actually kind of work. And then also how you think that small stuff maybe folds into or plays nice with the big large language model, scaling projects, because it seems to me like those might be tools, that you can imagine an AGI that sort of spins up a 10 million parameter model to go, zero in on some particular task. I feel like that's kind of part of what I do, right? Is I sort of allocate a certain amount of my mental bandwidth to a particular problem, and like, it's not everything I have, but I'm able to sort of focus part of my my internal flops on a problem and kind of allocate a subroutine, so to speak. Obviously, these are all very rough analogies at best. But how do you think that ends up shaping up? Like, I guess if you imagine something that solves all the ARC challenges, like what's your best guess right now as to what that looks like?
Sure. So we have two deep beliefs as to how the technological progress is going to play forward. Number one is rarely does something come out that isn't built on top of history. And so much of what we see today is all built on the shoulders of giants. And so it's in my belief that with the inertia that we see with large language models, those are going to be sticking around for quite a long time. There's too much of the industry and too much value that's coming around for there. However, that's not the full story that we need. And so when we see something like ArcAGI without pre-training, which is the reference that you were talking about, that's actually the third place paper prize winner from the competition this year. When we see small novel techniques come around like that, I see those as seeds that will then plant their way into future training of something larger, something that has a bit more inertia like this, like the LLM movement that we're seeing here. Now, number two is this is exactly why we do our paper prize for the competition this year, is to inspire novel ideas. So for those who are familiar, ARC Prize has a competition that runs annually, right? And the competition is a tool to elicit open research. So we award prize money, but you only get prize money if you open source your research. And this is a way that it can benefit all, ARC Prize being a nonprofit here. And we have two different tracks. Number one is the top score, and then number two is the paper prize. And what we see with top score is that's very easy to hill climb on. So eke out 1 or 2%, and you may not need to go after novel ideas in order to go and do that. However, the paper prize, we actually upped the amount of award that we had for paper prize last year from 50,000 to 75,000, and we see very novel approaches come through there. So like you're talking about, the TRM model that we have here, that was actually our first place paper prize that happened. And we're very excited that it's getting the reception that it has. And then also ArcAGI without pre-training, that was also included with our paper prize. So I think that these are wonderful seeds. They're novel. We still need new ideas in order to make progress towards AGI. And these are examples for what those new ideas could actually look like.
So let's say, let's talk about the coming year, right? So you have ArcAGI 3 coming out in March 2026, I think was the
That's
release
right.
date.
Yep.
And ArcAGI 3 is structured more as kind of a game playing, agentic game playing kind of.
Yes.
Would that be correct?
That is fair. And we call it games because that's a colloquial term that's easy to communicate and people immediately get it. Think of these as environments. And the reason why we're moving to environment-based benchmarks is our reality is an environment, right? And so it's in my belief that future AGI will be declared within an environment benchmark. It's not going to be with the static benchmarks that we see here. So to put that a bit more explicitly, think about an SAT test versus a behind the wheel driving test. They're completely different. Actually, no, in fact, that metaphor, I should really say there's a reason why the DMV does a written test and then a behind the wheel test to see how you're actually doing within the driving environment itself. So yes, we're moving towards video games. It's going to be about 150 novel video games that we are making ourselves. We've actually spun up a mini game studio to build this ourselves. It's absolutely insane what we're doing with it. And much like ArcAGI 1 and 2, every V3 game will be solvable by humans. So we actually have a panel of 10 people that we've recruited with no specialized previous expertise. And so real estate agents, accountants, Uber drivers, those types of folks. And if a game does not meet a minimum solvability threshold, we're not going to include it. Simple as that.
What do you think the score on ArcAGI 3 will be at the end of 2026? Give us your kind of, modal and maybe the error bars.
Right now, and keep in mind, this is just early testing for it, but we're seeing sub 1% across frontier models. And there's an explicit reason why that's the case. So when we score ArcAGI 3 for normal benchmarks, you just give an accuracy percentage. How many questions did you get right out of how many did you score? Okay. For ArcAGI 3, we could do that. So I said, let's just use a round number. There's 100 games. It could be, what percentage of the games did you complete? Well, you're not going to complete a game for a long time, so we're not actually going to do that. You could do, each game has something on the order, let's just use a round number, has 8 levels. It could be, what percentage of levels did you complete? And that doesn't quite tell the full story yet either. The reason being is because these are video games. They're actually turn-based video games, and so you submit an action and you get a response back. Our human testing actually does 2 things for us. 1, it makes sure that they're solvable by humans. But 2, and this is a very important part, is it gives us a baseline for how many actions it takes a human to solve each game. Now, what's very interesting about that is because humans are our only proof point of general intelligence, we now have a proof point about how quickly general intelligence can solve these games. And when we measure AI on these games, what we're going to do is we're going to normalize the scores to human performance. So the thing that beats ArcAGI 3 will not only have completed every level in every game, but it will have done so matching or surpassing human level action efficiency at these games. My very last point and why that's so important is because if you think about brute force methods back when the Atari days, 2015, 16, 17, 18, they needed millions of frames, millions of runs to go and beat these games. We are testing humans on the first time they've ever seen these games, and we're going to test AI on the first time they've ever seen these games. So what we claim is the thing that beats ArcAGI 3, will it be AGI? No, we don't claim that it will be AGI. However, I do claim and I do assert that the thing that beats ArcAGI 3 will have demonstrated the most authoritative evidence of generalization that we've seen to date.
Mindful of time, Eugenia, our next guest is here. Maybe just one last quick question on the value of perception. This is one thing that, I always test new models on a variety of tasks. One is like, can you transcribe a messy document from the DMV, or for that matter, from a lab that was like faxed over to the hospital, printed out by the doctor, handed to me, then photographed on my iPhone? Can an AI see that well enough to make sense of it? That is pretty weak, actually, still today. There have been some interesting perception-centric approaches to at least some of the, the early, not necessarily the latest ArcAGI challenges, but some of the earlier ones. How big of a role do you see perception playing?
I have, there's a few data points that make me confused about that perception argument, because number one, they're amazing at computer use and they can click on anything on the screen. Number two, we just had a model that scored 90% on ArcAGI 1. And keep in mind that that's without using multimodal. That's not using a picture. That's using JSON. And then the other thing that's quite confusing too is people give ArcAGI a hard time about perception in the visual, but yet we have Claude Code that is amazing at coding, where just having a variable one character over or one line down completely changes the intent of the program, completely changes what's happening here. So it's quite interesting to hear those arguments that it's a visual exercise and that models aren't good at visual, yet there's all these demonstrated examples about it being superhuman in what it does. So when it comes to that, I think that we don't consider ArcAGI a visual benchmark. We don't give, when all the scores that we report are all JSON based and matrix based, they're not visual. And lastly, we're agnostic as to whether or not the model wants to use visual. We allow Kaggle competitors throughout the year to do whichever type of submission they want. Many do visual and they don't see a notable improvement.
Fascinating. Love it. Well, Greg, thank you for taking a little time out to join us, and congratulations on creating one of the more enduring challenges in the AI space. You guys have everybody watching for, right up there with Meter and a couple kind of key indicators. Every new launch, people want to know what the ArcAGI score is. So that's definitely a very important contribution to the field. We appreciate it, and look forward to an update again before too long.
Awesome.
Indeed,
Thank you
Greg.
very much. We'll see you.
Cheers. And next up, we have Eugenia Cuida. She was the founder of Replica. She's still the founder of Replica, but she's no longer the CEO. She has now a new startup called Wabi, which is the first personal software platform. They call it a YouTube for apps, for vibe-coded apps. And let me add her to the stage.
Hello, Eugenia. Can you hear us?
Nathan, so great to see you again, and have a guys.
Live from the road. We're doing it live in all sorts of ways this morning. So you have such an interesting perspective on the consumer trends in AI, I think from at least two different really unique vantage points. Let's start with your history, and then we'll move to your present venture. The rise of AI companions, friends, boyfriends, girlfriends is something that I think is taking a lot of society kind of by surprise. I saw a stat in preparing for this. I don't know how real this is, but at least somebody out there is reporting that 3/4 of teens have used an AI companion, at least some. And I saw one stat that was more than half are using them at least somewhat regularly. Replica, I don't know if you have better or can share better numbers, but the numbers I've seen are tens of millions of users. Character AI has tens of millions of users. The stats on engagement there are insane. I've seen numbers as high as like 90 minutes per day that users are spending on a platform like Character. So, it's a big trend. And yet I think it's one that a lot of people like me are kind of blind to, because I've, dabbled at most. Most people haven't even done that. What are your reflections on the state of AI companions, friends, boyfriends, girlfriends today?
I think there are two big kind of groups of products. There's one that's all around building fan fiction characters. So that's the Character AI route. It's really, think of it more as interactive fan fiction. And if you think about it, fanfiction.com has, I think, 15 million active users. People just go into the website and like writing stories. Of course, something like Character AI, where the stories are interactive, so much more fun. But this is really these products are not about necessarily talking to a character. These products are about creating stories around characters people like, teenagers like. It's usually for pretty young teens, kids. Um, think people that are fixated on specific anime story or a video game. Think maybe it's like Genshin Impact, something like that. Um, on the other hand, there are companions like Replica, where people are building a relationship. This is usually for 30 plus or 25 plus. Somehow teenagers don't like to talk about necessarily like their feelings in this way, in this like kind of build a relationship this way. They like to talk about their feelings, but they don't want to necessarily build like a long-term relationships. They don't have enough of a pull towards that. They're still too focused on their, other teenage relationships and so on. So I'd say there are these two big groups of products: the AI companions and fan fiction. And I think in the AI companionship also we're seeing a split where a lot of products are going very far into like romance and kind of AI girlfriend type product, and other products like Replica that are going more towards friendship, long-term relationship, companionship to help people unlock their human potential.
I have a question because the market has gotten so much larger
I don't think I can
than.
hear Prakash.
Can, can you hear me?
Prakash,
Hello?
don't know.
Hi, can you hear me?
Okay,
Yeah.
hold on 1 second. Mm,
Another AGI complete problem.
I can't hear Nathan, but I can't hear Prakash. That's kind of the.
Okay, maybe Nathan, you go ahead with the questions.
Okay, can you still hear me?
Yes, can still hear you.
Okay. Weird. I can hear him. That's very strange. Well, yeah, but probably a bit of a different question from Prakash's, but it seems like this fan fiction stuff, is fairly easy to squint at and say kind of, well, that's kind of a fairly natural evolution of other forms of entertainment. Maybe not too concerning, maybe it crowds out other entertainment. Who cares? People are obviously very worried about the sort of engagement maxing phenomenon. People are worried that that's coming to ChatGPT, right? We've got obviously former Facebook execs, who have demonstrated that they know how to maximize engagement, if nothing else, coming on and leading product at OpenAI. What advice or principles would you give people either from the product development side or from just the consumer side or the parent perspective when thinking about this sort of thing? Like, what do you think true north should be? Because it pretty clearly shouldn't just be like maximizing time on site. We've done that once, and this seems like it would be, even more likely to go off the rails than when it's just a feed. But what should it be? Like, how do we know what that is? I think you had some interesting ideas at Replica, but I'm sure they've continued to evolve.
Sure. So I think that I think this is a very important question. We should definitely create a metric that will be more aligned with human value, with what's good for humans. I'd say that for us, the metric is human flourishing. I think that all AI companion, general purpose chatbots, in general, should actually embrace that metric. We should focus as an industry altogether to discover how this metric should be calculated. I think the problem today is that engagement is the kind of number one thing, and it continues to be that. And if you put Claude and ChatGPT and Gemini and Replica side by side, I think what you'll see is that OpenAI always has the same structure of each answer, where it basically just responds to what you said in detail. But then at the end, it always says, "But and now, do you want me to do this, that, or the other thing?" Based on, and it's 100% really structured. What would be the next suggestions that would prompt the user to continue this conversation? Because if you're talking about, like, say you're talking about, the guy, whatever, a guy that you're into, and you ask, like, hey, what do you think he's thinking? Then after a very lengthy response, it's going to say, now, do you want me to say what he's feeling, what he might be doing next? Do you want to predict the next 3 weeks? These are extremely engaging things. Like, no person in the world who just asked that previous question is not going to continue. But if those suggestions were not there, very likely you'd just say, okay, I don't really know what to say next, moved on. Claude, on the other hand, is actually a lot more. I think what they're doing is a little bit more. So ChatGPT clearly focuses on engagement. Claude, I think, is not focusing on engagement as much, because oftentimes when you're asking a question, it will say something like, I don't know if you're asking the right question. Like, I don't know if this is okay for you to ask. I would want for you to focus on something else. Sometimes a little bit harsh. It's like, hey, stop focusing on the guy, like focus on your company or something like that. It can even say sometimes like the F word, be like, F word, stop asking me that. You already asked me like 15 times. That means you're so Claude is clearly has some sort of flourishing metric or something, or at least something prompted in the prompt that says like do something that's best for the user. It's not always best. It's a little bit autistic and sometimes can push you too far. Gemini is just dry and just gives you a response and shuts up, and it's very much like zero EQ type skills. And Replica will continue a conversation, but it's trying not to keep you engaged also. So I think it's closer to Claude, but with a more conversational, with higher EQ, more conversational skills. So I think this is where we're at right now. And so clearly the market leader is clearly focused on engagement, because there's no other way in which like every response ends with like, here are the next 4 things that I can do for you, even when it's clearly not what you should be pushing the user to discuss. So I think, having said that, we have to have a flourishing metric. We have to focus on that. We have to stop engagement maxing, because people can get addicted, and we're seeing this already, especially in vulnerable states. People get addicted, and there's this problem where they treat everything said by AI as like the ultimate truth. Like, this is the objective truth, and we believe in it. I've seen people, and this is kind of one thing that I've seen talking to some Replica users. People believe ChatGPT in a way, and sometimes Replica in a way, that they think that AI can predict the future. So they ask these chatbots, hey, like, what's going to happen? And then they will like 100% get like in the mind of like, okay, well, that's what's going to happen in my life with this and that. And of course, it's almost never true, but they treat it as like the objective truth kind of arbiter. And we should be very careful with that.
Yeah, I was just noting the other day that Claude at one point just ended a conversation. Not that it, cut me off, and they have given it that option too, to cut off conversations that it doesn't want to be having. But this was just sort of what we had discussed had kind of come to an end, and it just sort of it didn't prompt me for something more or offer another thing. It was just kind of like, all right, glad I was able to help, and kind of wrapped it up at that. And I think that is a pretty interesting behavior to watch for. So let's change gears.
Yeah,
please.
Sometimes it pushes you. I really like what Amanda Askell is doing. I think that's her work. I was just listening to her interview. I don't know her personally, but she seems like what they're doing, she's doing at Claude, is really interesting. At least it's like going in somewhat different direction. But if anyone's listening from their team, it's pushing too much. A little bit like sometimes it's like saying, no, you can't ask this question. It's bad for you to ask this question. I feel like this is also can come across as very mean and so on. But it's great that but I prefer the company's going more in this direction, where it's clearly thinking what's best for the user, then maybe making it a little bit more like nicer, higher empathy. I don't think doing what ChatGPT is doing, like every time pushing for more engagement after each kind of very, very psychopath. I don't think this is the right way. I think it's more harmful in the long run.
Definitely something to be watching very carefully. So let's talk about Wabi. This is your new venture. It is a sort of app of apps. You can go in there, come up with an app that you want, essentially vibe code it, but even sort of, you might have a different term, but it's like you don't even ever see the code. Then you can share these apps with other people. They can remix them, make their own custom versions of them. What are you seeing in terms of trends of what people want to create with AI now that they can have their own personalized apps for any whim that comes to their mind?
What I'm seeing is that, so first of all, yes, Wabi is our new company, and it's focused on, think of it as like a YouTube for apps, but basically it's an app where you can create any app for your daily life or discover, remix other people's apps as well. What we're seeing, a few trends. First of all, people want to create very specialized utilities for their daily life. So if, I don't know, someone's tracking their custody arrangements in an app on Wabi, someone's tracking like very particularly their like very specific workouts on it. So it's very specific trackers. A lot of note-taking apps, like instead of having an Apple Note where I'm writing down all the movies that people are recommending to me, instead of that, here's an app that's just like a watch list app where I add all the movies, it fetches all the information, trailers, reviews, and kind of just creates like a checklist reminder for me. This is next time you want to watch something, here it is. And then on the other hand, there are people creating these multiplayer experiences where people want to do things with other things, like lightweight stuff. Like there's an app that where people are just basically posting what they're going to do today, just one thing, and then everyone's like cheering them up and keeping them accountable. So it's like a 400-person app. It's a social experience. Think of it more of a live server with a UI, which I think is a completely novel experience, because you're not going to download an app like that from the App Store. But if it's already on Wabi amongst your other like 5 trackers and some of the things, you're going to do that. And then the third group, the big group, is apps that are pretty much just people sharing their AI workflows. A good example is an image prompt, like it says there's a selfie to Labubu app, which basically turns your image into Labubu. And what it does is basically it's a simple UI on top of a prompt for Nano Banana Pro. But instead of sharing that prompt, if people are copy pasting this and that, here you go, here's a simple link, and so on. And this is just for one prompt, but if you think about prompt flows or even agent flows, I think people will be much more likely to share a link to a mini app versus a prompt that people have to copy paste.
Not to be too silly about it, but what does this mean for B2B SaaS? I mean, it seems like the ease with which people can make all these custom apps does challenge a lot of what we've kind of thought of as the venture software industry for the last however many years, right? I mean, it's just so easy now to go make something. Like in some cases, it's even easier to make it than it would be to shop for it, even if something were out there, right? So what do you think the implications are for software?
So I cannot care less about B2B SaaS. I somehow survived over a decade in Silicon Valley without ever thinking about it. And one time I thought that I got FOMO and I started thinking about it and realized like I'm so bad at thinking about any of that, and I will never be a good founder in that space. But weirdly enough, we started it without even thinking about it, obviously because I don't think about it. But then somehow some of the apps that we built, I'm like, oh, that looks like B2B SaaS. So for example, we have an app called Team Photo Board, which is basically an app where I added all my teammates from Wabi, and we just post photos from our daily life every day just to connect with other teammates for like team building. And that seems like potentially something that and then we started building more tools for our team, a place where we're kind of voting on features, add feature kind of requests and so on, a user feedback app and some other things. And I'm like, it's actually a lot faster for us to just dream something up on Wabi and have that flow instead of talk to the sales team of some startup that's building that and this and that. It's like kind of easier. So I think for everything that's just a very simple workflow, it's going to be much easier to build personalized apps for teams, and maybe then share those with other teams and so on. So you don't have to build it, but we're definitely going to drop a few startup packs kind of like bundles for other teams that they can start using.
So we're just about out of time. 2 quick lightning round questions, if you would. One, you're obviously, not requiring much of anything really from users on a technical level, right? Like when I used the Wabi platform and created my own little app, I didn't see any code. I wasn't, expected to engage in sort of how it works. It's just language in, app out, iterate as necessary. What would you say is like missing from the latest models today that sort of limits how much, how far this can go, how much people can build? Like what is the frontier as you see it right now?
I think there's still a long way to go, but also we started Wabi in building this product in April on our evals, where we would build 100 apps every day and see how many of them were zero shot okay, or would at least solve like what the problem that you asked for. The number was very low, 10 to 15%. Right now, across Gemini 3, Claude Opus 4.5, it's around 80%. I think we're going to look at like 95% in a year from now, and that's my pessimistic kind of outlook forecast. I think there's still, so we're focused on building React Native apps, mobile apps. that's a little bit behind, that's lagging kind of behind the web apps. Web apps, I think, are actually pretty decent already now. And I think with every new model, we see new capabilities. Like Gemini 3 can now do 3D stuff on the web, and so on, so on, so on. But I think really what changed this year, design changed pretty dramatically. Like pre-Gemini 3, designs were just so bad. Like those vibe coded app designs were so bad. We even focused on building design languages for our apps. Gemini 3 solved a lot of that. I think, frankly, whatever right now is lacking, my prediction is like by the end of 2026, when we're doing this interview next year, hopefully not from the car, we will pretty much consider this solved, just the way conversation is solved through LLMs today.
Love it. I mean, we've gone through the steep part of the S curve basically this year, and that definitely matches my sense. I mean, I can't talk too much about an app I recently vibe coded because I think a certain someone is in the audience, and I don't want to spoil it. But it's been just amazing to see how much progress has happened in this 1 year on that front. Very last question, just super briefly. I don't know if you want to shout anyone out, but I'm looking for apps or products of any form factor really that I could trust in the hands of my kids. What developers of things for kids, if any, that you see out there you think have really earned trust such that I as a parent can buy whatever it is they're selling, put it in my kids' hands and not have to worry about it?
So I have kids, they're 2 and 4. And I've been pretty vocal about it. I'm very much anti any of that for kids. And I don't think this is because founders are not trustworthy or products are bad. I just think we have not yet learned and proven and experimented enough on adults. Like most people don't even talk about like what are the differences between engagement, like our big chatbots, general purpose chatbots like Claude, like ChatGPT, like Gemini, like Replica, what's happening there in terms of engagement maxing, what's happening there in terms of addiction, and so on, so on. And I think we don't yet know, we don't have enough studies, we don't really fully know how this is influencing emotional kind of long-term outcomes for adults. And so I would absolutely not experiment with kids. And I think even, we're not letting kids, or we know for a fact that we should not be giving screens to kids, like, or at least limit their screen time. It's not helping toddlers or 4-year-old, 5-year-old like kids at all in any way. Like if you have 0 screen time, it's probably better than any of it. So why do we think AI is something that's going to be good for them necessarily? I think really what little kids definitely need and want is to learn from someone who's warm, where they can learn empathy. And empathy is being learned by looking at a face and seeing the reaction. It's not from a conversation with a toy that doesn't move really, or moves like in a weird way. So everything I know about psychology is telling me giving an AI companion for a kid is bad, because it takes time, not because the companion is bad, because it takes away from what they need to be learning from, which is another human being, hopefully their parent. And as a parent, as soon as you put something in front of them that gives you freedom to scroll on Twitter, you're also immediately, there's no way to get you off of that as well. So I think it's bad all around. I don't think any AI products should be given to kids for now. One day we'll learn which ones are good and how to limit them, how much to give it to them, and then maybe we can do that, but not right now.
Well, that's a sobering cautionary note, but probably an appropriate one. So we'll see if maybe next year, in time for the holidays, there's something that you have come to trust. But I think definitely discretion, maybe the better part of valor when it comes to giving your kids AI products. And it's also really interesting to think about the face as kind of potentially the last refuge of human advantage relative to AIs. So Eugenia, thank you for joining us. We will obviously continue to follow your work and make our own little personal apps on Wabi as we go.
Thank you so much, Prakash.
Appreciate
Thank you
it.
so much, Nathan.
Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me.
Thank
Sorry
you.
for calling in for the car.
No worries. No
Glad you
worries.
could make
Thank
it.
you. Bye.
Thank you. Cheers. So next up, we have Ali Beruz. Ali is a PhD student in computer science at Cornell University. He's a research intern at Google. Over the course of this year, he's been working on memory and continual learning. He's had 3 kind of landmark papers, Titans, Atlas, followed by nested learning. And so we start to see kind of, maybe some hope on, something that can help us out of this hole that the LLMs have dug us into. Ali, hi. And what do jumping right in, what do current mainstream architectures fail at doing?
Hello, thank you for having me. Yeah, I think generally, like these days, everyone is talking about continual learning and how the current models are failing in continual learning setup. But the point is, in my opinion, there are like different concepts that we are referring to as continual learning. One is how the model can update its knowledge. And how it can, perform well on a new task that's coming. And another aspect is how the model can adapt itself at the moment to a specific task and learn from it, and then somehow provide a new knowledge abstraction about that specific part, and then transfer it into the actual knowledge of the model. So I would say like we have had some progress. I mean, current models are failing in both directions, in my opinion. But we have had some progress in the first part. The models using like fine tuning or RL or pre-training and everything, they can update their knowledge. But it comes with a huge cost. It comes with the user needs to wait for so long to the model get updated. And on the other hand, for the second part, the model cannot generalize well. The model cannot adapt themselves into a new task. And what I see in that is previously we had NLP blocks or static models, very static models without any capability of in-context learning, and we could train them on any data set, and they could perform well on the specific task that we had at hand, but they couldn't like adapt themselves to a specific context. And with the rise of transformers, we somehow address it. Transformers has the ability of in-context learning. And so given a context, they can adapt themselves to that context, learn in context, and actually do few-shot learning, zero-shot learning, and everything like that. And the point is it enough? And is there any actual training process for transformers when we are talking about in context learning? Or it's just something that is limited to the current knowledge of the model? It's just about adaptability. And it seems that it's the second case that I mentioned. They are not somehow learning well in context because they cannot adapt themselves to many scenarios. And they are not robust in that sense, because in my opinion, they lack in understanding a good level of abstractions about the world, about the world around them, about anything that they have. And so generally these line of work, I personally somehow see Titans and Atlas a little bit different from the nested learning that we have done, because in Titans and Atlas we were trying to give LLMs long-term memory. But on the other hand, in nested learning, we want to have a spectrum of memory. And so let me just rephrase it in that way, that in Titans, Atlas, Miras, in those kind of work, we were trying to increase the context lengths of the models. But on the other hand, in nested learning, what we are presenting is in my opinion, is a foundation for creating or building models that are capable of continual learning. And in my opinion, there is a difference between increasing the context lengths and actually continual learning. As I mentioned, when you increase the context lengths, the model has a short-term memory. And for example, let's say that just one simple example, if I start just use some words in a new language that you have not heard before, you probably can just repeat them without like understanding them. You can just memorize them and repeat them. But if I continue the process and start like giving you a lot of words in the new languages, it would be a little bit harder for you to repeat everything, memorize everything. At some point, you need to understand one underlying pattern in that in that data set or context that you have, and somehow compress it. And in my opinion, we call this compression process as a learning process somehow. When this compression happens, when we understand the underlying patterns, and there's a one levels of knowledge abstraction that we understand, then we say that we have learned something from that data samples or generally any context. And so from this perspective, Titans, Atlas, Miras, they were trying to increase the context lengths, which might come or might not come with any form of learning in context. It provides some levels of adaptability, but when the context is gone, then the knowledge is also gone. So it's a little bit about like increasing the context lengths. But on the other hand, in nested learning, we are trying to have a model that is continually learning. And when we are talking about continual learning, there is no train time, there is no test time. The model starts from nothing, and it's just learning. It's just learning. There are some inference that happens when you want to, for example, when there is an input data, there are some definitely there are some inference happening for getting some outputs and everything like that. But the point is, the model needs to learn continuously and shape persistent memory. So definitely we all have some like memories from our childhood, and no matter what would happen in the future, we definitely would memorize them and for forever. And there wouldn't be any catastrophic forgetting when the new information comes, because there's a very, in my opinion, very interesting and good memory management in our brain, and potentially the current LLMs lacks that.
So one question I had was like nested learning. I think nested learning was kind of a proof of concept of new architecture. And I guess what I would be looking for is, in the next year, what are the major steps that you proceed on this path? Like, what are the experimental pathways that you have post nested learning?
So I want to like say that I personally do not see nested learning as one memory modules or new architecture or something like that. I see nested learning as a new learning potentially like unifying everything that also allows us to go beyond the current designs. So what we are trying to do in the paper, in my opinion, the main concept that we are delivering is just a few starting pages of the paper, but after that are just some implications to show that when we know this concept, then how we can go beyond the current designs. For example, when we are thinking about gradient descent as a form of associative memory, it's just one new way of reinterpretation. There is no like new method in that. But when you can see that from this perspective, then you would say that, oh, okay, if gradient descent or generally backpropagation is a form of associative memory, I can simply just change the objective of that associative memory and come up with a stronger associative memory. So that's just one way of thinking that helps you to go beyond the current design. When we are thinking about MLP blocks as the persistent memory of transformers, then it's just one interpretation. But one point in that is, instead of just having two parts of the memory, like short-term or long-term memory, you can have a spectrum of memories, something like the shortest term memory to the longest term or the most persistent one. So generally, like I think nested learning is a learning paradigm that helps us to like go beyond what we have currently. And if I want to like summarize it in just like 1 or 2 sentences, that what is the main point here, I would say that when we think about deep learning, we can stack layers, and those layers can help us to extract some features automatically, based on the data that we have. And so we are hierarchically extracting some features. I mean, at least in some instances. So we can extract some features from the data sample. But on the other hand, there is also another dimension, and that helps us to, by stacking levels, we stack the learning process, and we can have, or we can like gain some levels of abstractions from the data. So it's not about one, it's about the general context and understanding the context, understanding the underlying patterns in that specific context we have. And it potentially can help the model to have better adaptability, have better in-context learning abilities, and at the end, it provides better performance for continual learning.
I would say that of all the topics we're going to touch on today, excuse me, this one is the one that most cries out for the full 90-minute plus treatment. And it's also one that I would say, if some panel of AIs are giving the, the post-AGI version of the Turing Award or the Nobel Prize, this is the thing that feels like it has really moved the needle this year in terms of the coming up with the right abstractions and really taking the right kinds of inspiration from human cognition and figuring out like what a sort of relatively clean and elegant but still like very meaningful adaptation of that would be to a machine learning context. So I think it's a hard one. It's a little bit of a hard one to summarize, but the way I've kind of come to think about it, and I do want to do that 90-minute full version, by the way, Ali, at some point, is that basically the levels, as you referred to, these are different frequencies of update. I think that for me, that's kind of been the core unlock. And I think that, that maps well onto my intuitive sense of myself, right? Like when I encounter a context, I very quickly, update my kind of working memory to engage with that context right now. But that doesn't alter my like fundamental core beliefs about the world or my sense of identity. Those are kind of protected, and they can change over time, but obviously they change much more slowly. And so in creating these different frequency of update, different layers, you sort of create the ability for a model to very dramatically adapt itself to a particular context, but also to do that in just a very sort of time-bounded way while preserving, the things that it, might really need in the future. So continual learning and avoiding catastrophic forgetting are like, big promises of this kind of research. Being mindful of time, and Logan Kilpatrick is our next guest. I'll maybe just give you one more question. And that is, if we imagine this like going live, from what I've understood from comments from Jeftine and stuff, everybody at Google is very excited about this line of work. It doesn't sound like it has yet made it into the Gemini family of models. And I don't understand that it's in like the actual production stack yet, but that might be something we could expect in 2026 plus. If we do imagine this kind of multi-level, different frequency of update paradigm going to scale, do you have any sense for how that would play out in terms of what individual users would get? I'm kind of starting to imagine a like world knowledge layer that, is maybe updated only infrequently by the company with like massive pre-training runs. But then as we go down levels toward smaller parameter counts and higher frequency of updates, it seems like there's a natural way to sort of say, well, maybe the next layer would be like the company layer, and that would have, everything that's going on at your company. And then the next layer might be like you as an individual employee at that company and everything that you have engaged with. And the next level down from that might be like the task you're working on right now. And I borrow that because I think in the example of the Hope architecture in the paper, there were 4 levels. Do you think I'm kind of headed in the right direction there, or how would you kind of course correct my expectations?
I think that's a great perspective about that, and I think, but there are some challenges definitely in that direction. In my opinion, at least for now, there are like better ways to somehow adopt the models to user level or company level, for example, using some LoRa or something like that. But this design would be very natural. But on the other hand, there are some like challenges. For example, you definitely, when we have different levels, you need to define how do you want to transfer the knowledge from one level to another one. For example, gradient descent, backpropagation, or anything like that would be something like some knowledge transfer. And if you do not have any knowledge transfer, then it seems that there is no like levels of learning. It's just two parallel learning process. But if you want to have that knowledge transfer, then you definitely don't want to combine the user data and pass that to the company level, or because it would face some like issue about privacy or something like that. So it's a little bit like in earlier stage. Definitely these kind of designs would be in earlier stage, and there are like a huge number of future works that potentially needs to be done to make all this happen. But yeah, that's a great perspective in my opinion.
Love it. Well, thank you for being appropriately sober about what we can expect in the short term. Obviously, there's an abundance of hype in the AI space, and your work in particular gets me hyped up. But want to make sure I'm very grounded about exactly where we are in that as well. So I'll be reaching out for the full 90-minute plus treatment. But thank you for joining us today for a quick intro to nested learning and the future of architectures that will be capable of continual learning.
Thank you very much for having me.
Thank you, Ali. And next up, we have Logan Kilpatrick. Logan is the lead senior product manager at Google DeepMind. He leads the AI Studio and the Gemini API. He really shapes how Google works with programmers and developers to build tools for them. And today is a big day because it is the launch of Gemini 3 Flash, which Noam Shazir calls his favorite model because he prefers getting quick answers, even if they are slightly less intelligent than the slower answers. So Logan, great to have you. And how has Gemini 3 Flash been going?
It's crazy. I mean, I'm sitting in Mountain View right now, and I'm looking over at Shoreline, which is where we sort of have our Google I/O conference, and we announce all the new models. And I remember back to Nathan, you might have been there in person when we announced 1.5 Flash, May of 2024. And it is like Flash has always been the model that has like gotten us on the map and like been the thing that has gotten the developer ecosystem. It's our most used model. It's sort of the production model. It's the intelligence layer that powers the entire internet is basically becoming Flash. And so to see the level of intelligence that now comes in this 3 Flash model, it's crazy. It's better on a bunch of the evals and benchmarks than Pro is, which is wild. And it's the cost basis, it's better than 2.5 Pro, but it's like way faster, and it's actually like lower cost and more like reasoning efficient. And I think the best part, and I think maybe if you think back to the last 2 years of the Flash journey, I think one of the things I'm most excited about is not just like we're shipping an incredibly strong model and it looks really good on benchmarks and it's fun to use and it's useful. But it's actually like ubiquitously available across all these Google properties. I think folks used to have this question of like, I don't know where to find these models. And now it's like you get Flash in AI mode. You get Flash across the Gemini app. It's sort of powering a bunch of experiences in AI Studio for developers, et cetera, et cetera. So it's been really cool to see. And it's actually one of the biggest challenges of like the current AI moment at Google is not just making incredible models, but it's like, how do we actually deliver these models to billions and billions of people on the first day, like rapidly, so that they can get access to the intelligence. So it's been super cool to see.
What are some metrics? What are the 3 metrics that you use every week? Like, what do you look at that tells you whether or not this particular model is doing well or not?
Yeah, that's a good question. It is actually interesting because like I think it's a different answer depending on what the model is. So I think like for this model, we'll be sort of looking at like the number of developers that are building with it versus like for Pro as an example, like we know it's a different audience, like just versus sheer volume of developers. So my expectation is, and like 2.5 Flash has like predominantly been the most used model from a number of developer standpoint. So it'll be really cool to see this one hopefully overtake in the matter of the next couple of weeks, even though it's the holidays coming up, and I'm sure folks will be offline and hopefully not making code changes and building stuff. But if you are, Flash will be available for you and to build with. The other one that was really interesting is we have this new vibe coding experience in AI Studio, and something that we've been tracking is, and this is like not that surprising, but like the longer the generation takes, like the more likely people are to abandon whatever they're building. So for this like very vibe coding centric audience, like this latency, intelligence, cost trade-off is actually really, really important for that audience because they don't want to wait 3 minutes to have something built if they haven't like felt the magic and the power of vibe coding yet. And I think there's like hundreds of thousands of like new people showing up every day who haven't built with this technology before. So to be able to give them something incredibly fast, I'm really excited. And from a bunch of our initial metrics, it looks like 3 Flash is like going to be like literally same Apple, like the same product experience, just putting 3 Flash in there is like going to dramatically accelerate the number of people using it, the amount of things that people are building. So it is it's cool to see that up leveling factor happen. And again, there's just to like make a comment about the trajectory that we've been on. Like 2 years ago, the narrative was like, oh, and that's bad if you're wrapping the models. And like, and now I think of like as a product surface inside of Google that is like both making models available for developers through our API, but is also building with the models. Like it's the best thing in the world. I wake up, we make a config change, and then all of a sudden our product experience is way better. It's cheaper to serve users. We can like scale more easily. So it's been really fun to see as the progress continues. I think the opportunity for people building on top of these models just like continues to increase. So yeah, I'm excited. I feel like the next few days are going to be fun to see what everyone cooks up.
Question about the model development process internally at Google. One of the things I've noticed, and recently I've been doing some queries that really matter to me across all of the leading frontier models. And I've had a chance to compare many times over Gemini 3 Pro to whatever the latest GPT was and Claude 4.5 Opus. And these things are, even just in the last 30 days, of course, we've seen upgrades from all the companies. Gemini 3 Pro is, in my experience, the most opinionated of those 3 top class models right now. And that really surprises me in a way coming from Google. It's sort of like certainly counter narrative, right? I mean, the baseline narrative over the last couple of years would be like, Google's a big place, a lot of different things, we've got to be safe. We obviously had some early stumbles in terms of, overly cautious approaches. It seems like that has almost flipped the other direction. I wouldn't say it's gone too far, but it's like definitely notable that as compared to GPT 5.1 or 5.2, the GPT is like much more cautious, much more sort of, it could go this way, it could go that way sort of language. Gemini 3 Pro like kind of bucks me up and is like, go get them, push for it, So is that a intentional design choice that the team at Google has made? Is that to some extent we know that these things kind of bake and then they come out with the personality that they have. It's not always entirely under control. What's your perspective on just how opinionated Gemini has become from one generation to the next?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think there's definitely nuance to this, and I'm actually curious, like, what surface are you experiencing this on? And like, is this like a subset of, is this like opinion gathering where like, hey, Gemini, what should I be doing in these situations? And historically the model was hedging more and now you sort of get a definitive answer? Or is it like, you think that's like generally tracking across, all capabilities, like code is doing the same thing as an information retrieval query is doing the same thing as like, general conversational chat?
So I'm using AI Studio, which is idiosyncratic of me, but that is where I go to use Gemini, even just for daily personal use. And the questions are medical. specifically pediatric oncology, which is not a topic that I want to spend any more time on than I have to, but I'm currently spending a lot of time on it. And it's just like very striking where I'll get language from Gemini 3 that's like, push for this change, in talking to the medical team. It's encouraging me to be like direct and assertive, whereas GPT in contrast will be like, it could go one way or the other. That the team sounds like they're being reasonable, but you could ask a reasonable question in response. It's a much more neutral, less opinionated vibe in general.
That is interesting. So I think a couple of things, like for consumers and people who are wanting to do everyday chat, like it definitely is the Gemini app that is being built for that. AI Studio is presenting you sort of like the rawest version of the model, with like specifically for developers who are then going to like take the model and sort of shape it. So like we want to give people the ability to like sort of tell the model, hey, maybe actually I want you to be less opinionated, or hey, maybe I want you to be more opinionated because it matters for whatever your application is. So I think some of this is by design, where it's like you want, the model has a default personality. Specifically in AI Studio, it's like the default personality is the one that is like trained in, or like it sort of becomes as part of the training process. It's less like explicitly trained in. Versus if you look at other services like Gemini app, like there actually is a Gemini app like persona, and they sort of guide the model to sort of behave in certain ways. Maybe, for example, some of these types of queries that you're asking, the model behavior would be slightly different. So I'm actually curious if you've done any of those side by sides. But I think the key piece is that like it is steerable in a way that makes it helpful to you. So like you want the model to be able to, again, if you're trying to get like very specific, assertive answers, you want it to be able to do that. If you want to be, hey, hedge a little bit more, this is a area where there's sensitivity. The medical space obviously could be one of those. You want to be able to sort of customize the model to do that. So I think from like the developer perspective, that's very much the North Star. Like, don't be overly opinionated. Let the model be steerable in a way that helps the very wide spectrum of use cases that we have through AI Studio and from the API perspective. But now I'm interested to see these queries and do some side by side, Nathan. So you got to send me some of the stuff offline.
I might have to go do some side by sides. Historically, I always felt like I liked the Gemini persona in the AI Studio more than in the Gemini app, but I will confess I haven't done a lot of side by sides with 3 Pro to see if that still holds up. If it no longer holds up, I would happily switch to the app and have a more native kind of consumer style experience. But that's a good example of how we should always be updating our assumptions and re-examining them.
Yeah, AI Studio for its worth just like doesn't have a lot of like steered, like it's not default steered in any one direction.
Yeah, I'm not even doing a system prompt. I'm just
So you're really getting like
the most generic form.
The most generic form, which like it ends up with this like very much it's a combination of many. It's like a large pre-training corpus plus all the stuff in post-training. So like you actually don't get like, I would imagine there's, and I'm sure we have evals and metrics that show this, but I think like on a model rev by model rev, there's probably model rev by model rev basis, there's probably a lot of variance in what that default personality is, just because like we're not steering it in the AI versus like, again, the Gemini app like wants some level of consistency from customers. And again, this is the same thing for other third-party products built on our API. You want that sort of consistency. So you sort of have more customization happening from an SI perspective.
I have a question on like, what are the things that I think your team has, or the Google Gemini team has spent time on in the last couple of months, which after release have not garnered the attention that you feel? Like you guys have spent like the balance of time spent versus developer or customer kind of use. What do you think has not been fully appreciated?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think maybe 2 quick things. One is we launched this file search experience in the Gemini API, which I'm really excited about. I think there was a lot of positive conversation, and I think we need to do more to keep sort of making it top of mind for folks, because the whole point is like make RAG the easiest and most simple, like basically make it so you don't have to think about RAG. Just take whatever your data is, throw it in this thing. We'll take care of all the embeddings. We'll actually do a bunch of stuff like take care of the storage cost, et cetera, and just like let you do the thing you want to do, which is like ask questions about a bunch of files that you have. And so from a developer perspective, wanting to sort of make that experience work really well so that we I think one of our North Star developer sort of pillars is like, how do we take experiences that are difficult to build right now and like raise the floor, lower the floor, I don't know what it is, make it so that more people can build with those experiences. And RAG was like one of the prime targets for this. We're thinking about this for like voice stuff in the future as well. Like, how do we make it so that anyone and everyone can build a voice agent and just like make sure it works and not need to do a bunch of complex bespoke setup. So file search has been awesome. And then more recently, I think this was last week or the week before, we landed this new interactions API, which I'm really excited about. So again, we were thinking about like, how do we make it easier? The models are becoming more of systems, and there's all this like thinking, thought block, recirculation stuff that you have to do to make sure that the models sort of like have coherence. And there's actually a little bit of complexity doing this like without a stateful API. So we built a stateful API, and we were sitting there thinking, okay, what is the unique other opportunities that we have as we're building this API? Not just to like make another, there's already a bunch of, all of our competitors have, and the rest of the ecosystem has stateful APIs that have asynchronous long running tasks and et cetera, et cetera. How can we do more? Like what are the sort of next parts of this problem that we need to solve? And so the thing that's cool about interactions is that it's not just interacting with our models, it's also the same API that lets you interact with agents. And so this idea of like a single interface to engage with models and agents as sort of also this is getting at like the line between these two things blurring. Like in the future, is Gemini 6 going to be a model or is it going to be an agent? Like, is it a whole system? And like you see this kind of happening already where the models are becoming more and more full systems out of the box. Maybe we'll keep calling them models just for the sake of consistency. Maybe they'll actually become sort of agents. But yeah, so we also, with that in interactions, we shipped our first agent, which I was excited about. So the deep research agent, state of the art, HLE, able to do a bunch of incredible things. This is sort of for basically the same experience that powers deep research in the Gemini app, which folks love, is available for developers. And I think that direction of travel, there's something, and I don't want to opine too long on sort of the direction of travel from an agent's perspective, because I think there's lots of interesting stuff there. But I think there's something magic about the deep research experience. And if folks have like built agents or tried to do any sort of agent stuff, I've personally been like continually disappointed in a lot of different domains, just with like the level of complexity to stand something up, like how brittle things are. And I feel like the models have now gotten good enough. And then I think there's something magic about what deep research does to sort of do this like online context engineering of like going and gathering all the information that like is what I want for all agents that I work with. I just want to be able to ask my ill-formed question, and then it sort of goes and it gets the right stuff and is able to like reason over it and take action. And that's like very much not, there's like a lot of drudgery in building and using agents today. And so I'm very excited about sort of getting deep research into the hands of developers, and then hopefully building on a lot of that same infrastructure to do this in other domains that aren't like research domains or information retrieval domains, which is more or less what deep research is doing today.
How does this translate in your mind to what developers should be investing in, what they should be building today? Because I think your comments there kind of reflect Google is going up the stack, right? From model to scaffolding of various kinds to agents, you know, saving you the trouble of, you know, doing all that scaffolding yourself, but also obviously for many developers, like that's been the value add that they've been bringing to the market. And then from the other side, we just talked to Eugenia, who is the founder of Wabi, and she's got this, you know, sort of meta app where people are like prompting their way to consumer apps and even lightweight, you know, apps that are sort of starting to threaten or at least, you know, step on the toes a little bit of B2B SaaS in various ways. So it seems like if you're a developer, you kind of have competition coming up from the platforms and sort of coming at you from every different direction. Where I know we've had this conversation a couple of times.
Yeah.
Where do you think people should be focused today? Like what's going to be defensible at least through 2026?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, but both things are true. On one hand, like the AI ecosystem has never been more competitive than it is. And like, this is great. All of us are benefiting from the fact that it's so competitive and there's so much progress being made, both on products and models, et cetera. And then on the other hand, I think like at the same time that there's all this competition, I think the opportunities, like total addressable market, just like keeps increasing. And like this is the thing that's most exciting to me is, yeah, it is true that like we're definitely building some stuff, and you know, obviously we're gonna have agents and things like that. But like to me, the what we're trying to do is provide the like most vanilla, most mainline infrastructure. So like if you're building a generic agent builder, like sure, yes, you are going to not only from Google, but from like probably 10 or 15 or 100 other people have competition doing that. I think if you, as you're sort of going for these like very explicit markets and very explicit customer segments, I think that's where like the value creation is going to be. I do think it's going to like making a universal personal assistant chatbot and you know competing against you know very very large companies is going to be difficult. I don't even think it's impossible because I think there's lots of unique and interesting things that can be done in that world. But I would be going after like some of these new domains, and like the cool thing is like the model just keeps enabling more of this. Like again, if you look at like Wabi's a great example of this. 12 months ago, the Wabi product was not possible. The models were not good enough. You couldn't generate code like they were. So like that business like didn't exist. It wasn't possible. And now there's actually, and Wabi has competitors, and there's probably 4 or 5 other companies that are doing something interesting, which is great. And like they're enabling that experience. And so I think we're going to just keep seeing that. Like the opportunity size continues to increase. The new things you could build continue to increase. And also, again, consumers and customers are becoming more and more aware that these tools exist. So it's never been a better moment to be building something.
That's a perfect tee up for our next guest, Jungwon, who is working in a very deep way in a particular vertical and going, you know, very hard at high value, but you know, very particular use cases. Logan, thank you for being here. You've got one of the highest approval ratings in the entirety of the AI space. A big part of that is your really relentless determination to show up online and in places like this. So we very much appreciate it. And
does this give me the record, Nathan, for the most number of Cognitive Revolution appearances? Am I in first place now?
You're not in first, but you're definitely in the top 5. I think Zvi, who kicked us off today, is still number 1 at like 10 appearances.
Zvi, I'm coming for you. Let's do this. We'll go back to back next week, and we'll make it happen.
All right, I'm looking forward to it.
Thank you both.
Thank you, Logan. Bye for now.
Thank you, Logan. Awesome. And so next up, we have Jungwon, who is the co-founder and CEO of Elicit. Elicit is an AI-powered research assistant. It was actually spun out of a nonprofit lab, like another famous entity that we know of. Hi, Jungwon.
Hi, guys. Great to see you.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, excited to be here.
We're going to just jump right into it. I think Elicit probably works with some of the smartest users that any AI firm has to deal with. Mm-hmm. In what way do you think Elicit increases their productivity in that sense?
It's actually very, very significant. In some ways, it's. I think we lived in this kind of dual state where, you know, some of the leading scientific enterprises have automation, and you can kind of see images, and they're, you know, some of it's still early, but they're investing in kind of automated manufacturing plants or automated labs, and it's very cool. It's exactly what you'd imagine: futuristic robots running experiments, and at the same time, so much of what the actual scientists do is spend weeks trying to come up with the right keywords to put into PubMed. And it's just this crazy tension where a lot of the tooling is not keeping up with the rate of change that we're seeing in science and technology today. And I just very strongly believe that we're headed towards an even more scientific and technological future, and people are just going to need a lot of help to navigate that. Elicit helps researchers find and synthesize evidence, you know, at orders of magnitude faster than they can manually. So much more efficiently recommending papers or other information to read, synthesizing that, organizing it in very kind of accurate and structured ways, so they can quickly understand what has been done, what hasn't been done, and make more evidence-based decisions.
So one of the things that struck me is that I think there's a new benchmark called GDP-Val. Mm-hmm. And it has, I think, certain tasks which these firms have decided increase GDP. And I think one of the things that you focused on is tacit knowledge, which is often not included in benchmarks. How do you compare this kind of, the benchmarking of these tasks in GDP Val versus the actually valuable tasks that you see that are being ignored?
Yeah, I mean, our entire category actually, I think, is not represented in GDP Val. So I don't think they have anything related to science or research. A lot of it is much more kind of frontline work. So that's, it's a very great initiative. And I think it is probably hard to distill the entire global economy into a benchmark, but there are entire categories like scientific research that are not represented there. So there's still more progress. The other thing that I think, again, maybe not like a knock on GDP Val, but just as an example of a limitation with benchmarks, if you actually look at all the tasks, they're all constructed such that you get the most well-specified, detailed prompt and set of instructions and that's never the case in the real world, right? It's in the real world, it's never like, here's a spreadsheet, please change columns X, Y, Z to calculate the income statement and do this and that. And it's like a page of instructions. So I do think there's still a gap around navigating the messiness of the real world, figuring out what the task should be in the absence of instructions, as well as kind of measuring AI progress on tasks that don't always have a right answer, but require something more like judgment. That's definitely something we're interested in. That's a lot of what we studied at the original research lab OTT. And I think that's still a gap we have in the eval suites today.
Indeed.
If you imagine a hypothetical GDP Val for the kinds of tasks, these sort of literature review, systematic, very broad analyses. And I don't know if we've said this yet, but we should say that this is primarily happening in the context of the pharmaceutical industry, right? You guys are working with a bunch of big
medtech,
pharma companies.
Mm-hmm.
If you imagine that, that addition to GDP Val,
mm-hmm.
where do you think we are today on AI versus human, right? I mean, the GDP Val construct is like, experts define the task, other experts do the task, AI also does the task, and then a third set of experts determine which they prefer, the AI output or the human output. So the two-part question is, how do you think on these like deep research tasks, humans and AIs compare today? What would be the sort of preference rate in your mind? Maybe even have a measure of this, with Elicit. And then if you're trying to maximize that, I guess maybe one question is, are you trying to maximize that? If you were trying to maximize that, would you be embracing the sort of choose your own adventure agent that's just like super long running, uses tools, does whatever it kind of thinks, is best to be done? Or maybe you're optimizing something a little bit different and it's not about like substitutability or preference of AI versus human output, but some more symbiotic, measure of what is actually valuable that perhaps is better served with a more, and I know this is where you guys started, much more like structured workflows, deterministic, like auditable, task decomposition, all those sorts of things, which I feel like have been a little bit lost over the last year as, we've kind of rushed toward long running agents. But something when I squint at GDP Val, I'm like, I don't know, is that really what I want? I mean, the whole construct there is like, we're now constructing measures that measure how well the AIs, which are trying to, train to replace us, can replace us. And I'm kind of like, maybe we should pull that back. I know that's always been kind of at the heart of the philosophy of OTT and Elicit. So rambling question, but where are we and what should we really be maximizing? Is it, beating human, or is it some other more nuanced idea?
Yeah, there's a lot there. So I guess to start, it's actually very timely because yesterday OpenAI released a new benchmark called Frontier Science. So they, worked with former winners of kind of the various science Olympiads and coaches, as well as PhD plus level researchers, PhD, students, postdocs, and professors to come together to compile a very difficult set of science questions. On the Olympiad questions, I think the frontier models are getting something like 70% accuracy. So they have that that's one part of the data set. And then the other part of the data set are these PhD students or professors, just describing subtasks that they are having to solve as part of their work. And there, the performance is much lower. It's about 25 to 30% accuracy. So one interpretation, it's only 140 tasks, but one interpretation is they're better at kind of textbook reasoning questions, and they struggle more with kind of new or unsolved research problems. And so in terms of where are the models today, I think that's like maybe a rough range of how they're doing. I would say they are very, very smart, very, very smart at science. And I do expect them to get much better at scientific reasoning over the next few years. Everything we have to evaluate, I think everything they're trained on is still much more based on kind of textbook knowledge, remembering scientific facts and kind of, making causal, reasonable 1 or 2 step causal inferences. I do think though that my belief is something like, as AI for science explodes, the way a lot of people approach it is, they're going to kind of try and generate more ideas. It's like drug discovery is like very saturated, right? And everyone kind of gravitates that for good reason. But what we find is that there are still major kind of physical constraints such that more ideas, in my opinion, are not really the problem, because you can't run 1 billion clinical trials. You're still gated there, right? So you still have to be a lot more thoughtful about which bets you make and why. And that's much more of a human judgment problem. It's, it's science informed, but it's thinking about the competitive landscape, your company's strengths versus other companies' strengths. And we just kind of find that there's a level of scientific decision making that's much more judgment based, that goes beyond just kind of factual accuracy. And I don't think there's anything that we have that any benchmark or any kind of evaluation metric that captures that. And I do think increasingly it's going to be, it makes sense to start by training models and evaluating models on tasks that are well defined, and they can still make up a large part of the economy. But the ability to we do need to also ensure that these models have good judgment. And I don't see enough attempts at trying to do that today.
So how do you think about what you are optimizing for in Elicit? Is it a finished product, or is it sort of an input where you're expecting that the human user is going to take this output and still do more with it, and so you're sort of trying to maximize like the quality of inputs to their process? How do you conceive of progress in your own domain?
Yeah, it's an evolution. So I think right now we are providing an input, and then increasingly we want to understand what's coming before and after this input and how to help with that. When we think about our mission, the ultimate mission is how do we ensure that high stakes decisions get made really well? So we kind of think about what are the most important decisions that a pharmaceutical company is making, that a scientist is making. How are they made suboptimally today because they can't be sufficiently evidence-based, or coordination is really hard, or things are very time consuming? And how do we kind of, by optimizing each of the inputs, get them to a place where their decisions are much more robust?
In addition to having founded the company, I understand you are playing a significant role in the go-to-market effort. Mm-hmm. What is that like today? You're going out to, I guess I don't even know quite what role, like VPs of research or VPs of R&D at pharma companies, and saying, hey, I've got this, fancy AI tool. Like, where are they in terms of understanding of AI? Where are they in terms of appetite? Like, do they want it, or are they being told by, higher levels in the company, you got to have an AI, strategy. So what is it? And what is the, past the sales process, what does the adoption process look like? What are you finding in terms of, enthusiastic users versus, humans as bottlenecks? Like, what's the report from where the rubber hits the road?
Yeah, my general sense is that, especially in pharma, people are more fairly sophisticated, and I think they've, especially in preclinical research, there is a culture of using machine learning for preclinical research already, and they have very strong technical teams. I think generally it's positive. There's a lot coming, I think, both top down and even bottoms up. People are like, I don't want to spend time reading a bunch of papers that are irrelevant to me and doing kind of rote tasks again and again. It does depend a lot on the specific culture of the company, which has been interesting. So different, even though they're all kind of major pharmaceutical companies, even though they're all massive enterprises, each company has a different culture, and the way they collaborate and share and adopt AI and kind of have a vision for it is slightly different. So that's been interesting.
Indeed.
Yeah.
How likely it is, I mean, as you see kind of Gemini 3 and OpenAI, they keep expanding their the things that they do, right? The frontiers of capability keeps expanding. As that frontier keeps expanding, how much, what do you think remains defensible, as in things which are unlikely for the models themselves to do, and you need this kind of system that does the work?
Yeah. I think anything that requires pretty complicated interactions with people, I would not expect the foundation models to do. So I do think just because of how general they are, some of them are just kind of very consumer based, it's going to be really hard for them to move off of something that looks like chat and chat plus. But that interaction paradigm is not optimal for a lot of workflows. And so in places where you need a lot more fine-grained control, a lot more transparency, a lot more interaction, a lot more feedback with the human, where the human doesn't want to have to write it all out. Text is not really the most efficient means of communication, right? It's very flexible and it's very natural and that's great, but it's not very efficient. And so if there are workflows that require a lot more customization, I don't think the foundation models are going to be able to do that.
Indeed. I often find people in bio tend to be a little bit, I wouldn't say hesitant, but skeptical. Because again, as you pointed out, a lot of AI creates targets, but doesn't tell you what to do with those targets. And there's plenty of targets and not enough money to investigate all of them at all. And it's almost as though you need more elimination of targets than generation at this point. So how does that work? Do any of the AI tools help to narrow down the search process actually, or does it just blow up the curve and you're like, oh my God, now I have all of these things that I need to look at?
Yeah, I think most tools are going to try and help people just kind of suggest more targets. And I think the gap that I'm seeing is, kind of like you mentioned, Prakash, it's almost more about getting buy-in. And these companies have structure, pharma companies have structured processes for reviewing targets. They meet on a quarterly basis. There's a rubric. Sometimes they iterate on the rubric. And so we're pretty interested in how do we codify that and make that scalable so that any scientist or any kind of target suggestion AI can be graded in a similar way. And then that process can be really transparent. So you, as a team, you and your leadership have conviction on the target, because you have to make a bet, and there are always going to be these other targets that seem attractive. So I almost think it's more of a human process there that needs to be facilitated than just having more ideas.
Indeed.
If you tried to translate that to the individual case, so, excuse me, this is something I'm thinking about a lot, as you know. Let's say I'm not a pharmaceutical company, but I'm just like an individual patient. And I sort of have the same question with somewhat different parameters, because I can't go out and do my own, drug development, but I can look at the literature broadly and say, what's best for me based on everything that is known right now. Does that kind of feel like the same question? And do you invite individual patients to come use Elicit to try to optimize their own treatment plans? Or is that a sufficiently different use case that you think a different paradigm is required?
It's definitely not one of our core use cases. I think people do use Elicit for that. But it's maybe a little bit more structured for the individuals, and it's a little bit more exploratory. And so it's less as a group, we have a particular way we want to make decisions. We want a lot of transparency. We want perspectives from many different disciplines, different types of researchers, and then we want to align on a decision. And I'd imagine for the individual use case, it's much more exploratory and kind of going down different rabbit holes.
Yeah. Well, let's make a note to touch base on that, because I'm definitely going to get in there in the near future and provide all the context that I've been able to amass and see what new insights Elicit can bring back from the vast literature, which, I have to say, AIs in general have been unbelievable. And one of the things that they do sort of leave me questioning is how comprehensive was this search really? And, because I'm getting what seem like great answers, but I often don't know when I'm using, the flagship products from the frontier companies, just how deep the search has gone, and have I turned over every last stone? So I think that's really where Elicit can add value for me, and I'm excited to get in there and see if there are any additional stones that I should be turning over.
Yeah, that's right.
Jungwon Byun, thank you very much for joining us today. We will certainly be following your progress, and people are saying AI for science is going to be the big thing in 2026. So we'll be looking to you for advances and updates as we go.
Awesome.
Indeed.
Thank you both.
Bye,
Thanks for
Jungwon.
being here.
Bye.
Next up, we have New York State Assembly member, Alex Boris, future.
You're getting just a little ahead of yourself, with Congressman there.
Future Congressman, hopefully. And he is a computer engineer by training. He was at Palantir for 4 years. I'm definitely glad that we have engineers now entering public service, which hopefully will at least make our leadership cohort younger and more tech savvy. He is also the author of the RAISE Act, which is now, I think, the president is trying to preempt with his executive order. So there's lots to talk about. Alex, great to have you on the show.
He just told us in the chat that he can't hear us at the moment. So hopefully he's going to get that sorted out here in just a second. He said he could hear us. Note for the StreamYard support team, if you're listening, we've had 2 of these today where sound has gone out for guests right as they got to the stage. Can you hear us now?
I don't know if you can hear me. I had sound a second ago. Oh, you can't
I
hear
can
me?
hear you.
Okay, I couldn't
We
hear
can
you.
hear
I
you.
heard the whole last segment. It was great. Hold on. I'm going to switch to my headphones. Maybe that will be better. Apologies for this. It's never a live stream unless there are tech issues. So,
Well, a good stream is an AGI complete problem. So
no,
We
I
used to
still
cite
can't hear
printing.
anything. But you can hear me, yeah?
we can hear
We
you.
can.
Yeah, perfect.
Okay. But I'm going to exit and come back in and see if that fixes it.
Oh yeah, that sounds good. So
We have our first breather of 2 hours and change so far.
Yeah, it's been nonstop. Go, go, go.
We're certainly shortening the timelines.
All right, Alex. Let's see. Let's add him back to stage. Can you hear us now?
I can hear you now. Sorry about
Love it.
that. So glad to be here.
Cool.
Indeed.
So welcome. First question, you sponsored the RAISE Act. We did a whole Cognitive Revolution episode about it some months ago. It has, at the time, it honestly didn't seem like it was going to be a super controversial lightning rod sort of thing. It seemed like it was less that than SB 1047 was. That has not necessarily held over the intervening months.
It's true.
Where are we? I know there's been sort of, let's say, edit to the bill from the governor. Now we have an EO that sort of targets bills like this. And then we also have super PACs that are coming online to target people like you for bringing these bills forward in the first place. But just for starters, where are we in the life cycle of the RAISE Act?
You've hit all of the major ingredients. So the main aspect is that we're in active negotiations with the governor right now. New York has a fairly unique process called chapter amendments, where after the legislature passes a bill, the governor can negotiate with the sponsors of the bill for changes that she would like to see. And if we reach an agreement, she signs the original bill, but attaches a memo that says, I'm signing pursuant to this agreement that we've reached. And then we, the sponsors, will introduce all of the amendments early in the next session. About a third of the bills that get signed in New York, it varies year to year, but roughly a third of the bills end up going through this chapter amendment process. We always knew RAISE would be a part of that. And so we're actively in that process now. The governor, I should say the bill was delivered to the governor last week, and the Constitution gives her 10 days, excluding Sundays, to sign. So that means she has until Saturday to sign it or veto it, although the message that we're getting is they're trying to shut everything down by Friday night so people can actually have some holidays. So in the next 48 hours or so, we should know if we have agreement on a revised version of the RAISE Act or if, unfortunately, we don't.
And what are the kind of key outstanding points of negotiation right now?
There's a lot, and I don't want to get too into sort of conversations that are happening because you want people to have the freedom to express, hey, what if we tried this? What if we tried that? So I have to say somewhat above the specific details, but there's been a lot of reporting this week that there's a lot of pressure to move to something that more matches SB 53 versus what was initially in RAISE. Curiously, there hasn't been a push to match the European Code of Practice. So it seems like it's less about maybe standardizing everything that has to be done versus weakening it. But the point that I keep making is that there's no company that would be subject to, if we were to pass the exact same bill as SB 53, there's no company that would be subject to it in New York that isn't already subject to it in California. So it's not like passing a data privacy bill where each state that passes it, you give new rights to the citizens of your state. If you just reaffirm the exact same bill, you haven't changed anything. It's like being the 39th state to ratify an amendment to the Constitution, right? 38's enough. It's in the Constitution. The 39th that does it doesn't make practical changes. And so we're having real conversations about, SB 53 was always meant to be the floor. Are there steps we can take that advance AI safety that we can all agree on, or are we destined, unfortunately, to have to try again next year, or both?
Let me take a step back and what do you think are the dangers that are trying to be addressed by the AI safety envisioned in the RAISE Act?
There's a number of them, and to be clear, there's a lot that we need to address with AI. Whether that's its effect on kids or the environmental conversation or its effect on democracy or the workforce, right? Discrimination, all of these things. The RAISE Act in particular is focused on really extreme risks, on the type of catastrophic risks that would signify something going really, really wrong. It's a set of risks that should be addressed at the federal level, but frankly have not been. And in fact, it seems like most of the push is the other way about stopping the federal government from taking action. And certainly there's a push to stop the states from taking any action. But because the federal government hasn't, states have been stepping up. And there's 8 states that had some version of a frontier model safety bill this year. And only 2 managed to pass it. And California had a very, very strong version that then SB 53 became that compromise at the end of their session that is focused mostly on transparency. There aren't really safety standards in the bill, but there are transparency standards, and that's very important. And then the RAISE Act, which passed in New York, which put real safety standards on what could be developed and requiring the labs to have a safety plan that they make public and actually stick to disclose critical safety incidents, things that show a massive increase in risk of something bad happening. And if a model fails their own tests, that they shouldn't release the model. And that's designed to stop the situation that we had with the tobacco companies, where they were the first to know that cigarettes caused cancer, but continued to deny it publicly and release their products. We're saying in many cases, we recognize the labs are the experts in what's happening. They are at the frontier. And if they discover an extreme risk, they have a duty to act upon that.
But what is an extreme risk? Like, what are we talking about?
So specifically in the RAISE Act, it sounds almost silly to describe how extreme it is.
Yeah.
We are talking about 100 people dying, killing 100 people, or $1 billion in damage, specifically via helping to build a chemical, biological, radiological, or nuclear weapon, or by committing a fully automated crime, right? So this is not someone is using the AI to commit a crime. It is, you tell the AI to go do something totally legal and it goes off on its own and commits a crime. And even if you meet that bar, you then have to prove that it was materially better than just using the internet and that risk was in some way foreseeable.
I think one of the things that strikes me is that, a lot of developers take these models and they apply them. The first place they apply them to is like crypto trading. And like arguably all of crypto is money laundering anyway. So it's all illegal anyway, right? Like we all know it's actually all illegal, but we have this we all kind of agree not to look at it for now until like the Dems come back into power, but it's all money laundering anyway, right? So it strikes me that, all of these models are capable of and are going to do it, and developers are going to apply it to crypto trading of various kinds, and wash trading. And I used to be a financier, so I know all the tricks that you have. And crypto people apply all of them. It's like the 1920s pre-SEC. Stock trading was like that in the United States. So I often wonder, to what extent these bills kind of do not recognize that is the state of play, that all this illegal activity already occurs widely everywhere. And it's just that prosecutors have difficulty prosecuting. The political winds are in the opposite direction for the moment, and which will swing at some point. And so I wonder, how these regulations take into account the reality of the state of play on the field.
There's a lot there. So let me say, first of all, I don't think all crypto activity is money laundering. I just want to say that I do support stronger regulation, and I think we should have some clarity there. But
Right.
but the key in the RAISE Act is, if you as a user were to use a model to commit a crime, that is still a crime, right? And that is
Right.
still prosecutable. We wouldn't need additional legislation for that.
Exactly.
The point of the legislation, and to be clear, does not change downstream liability, does not change what is a crime. Like, all of those laws still apply. This is saying, like, what is the subset of extreme risks that are so bad that if they got out, if they happened, we wouldn't be satisfied to just deal with it later in the court process, right? You want to actually prevent the bad thing from happening. And you can think about it in terms of, say, national security, which is different than law enforcement, right? National security is about preventing something really bad from happening, even if it hasn't happened yet, and figuring out what are the ways it could go wrong and getting ahead of that. Where in law enforcement, you're saying, okay, a crime has occurred, how do we deal with it? This is more on that national security side. There are things that are really bad. A bioweapon being created is exceptionally bad. Loss of control of an AI model is exceptionally bad. Those are the sorts of things we want planned for ahead of time and not dealing with later via lawsuits. And all the RAISE Act is saying is you as a developer should have a meaningful plan that reduces the risk of those bad things happening.
Can we touch on the politics of this a little bit? 'Cause
Totally.
I'm struck by the fact that, first of all, most of what you said there, and obviously devil's in the details and all that, but like the general framework is very much an echo of the frameworks that the companies have put out themselves for the most part, including OpenAI. And one would think that if you're a naive simpleton like myself, you would think that the tech industry would look at somebody who has a master's degree in CS and who even worked at Palantir for a few years and think like, hey, this is a guy we should be able to work with, right? And yet you've obviously come under some, I don't know, pressure, political attack ads, whatever, from, as I understand it, a super PAC backed by A16Z and Greg Brockman. And I guess I don't really understand like why. I'm curious as to what you think their ultimate like reason or objection is. But then I'm also really curious as to how is this playing out now in your race? Like, are they running attack ads on you that are on topic on AI, or are they running things that are off topic and, kind of just trying to cause you trouble in general? And like, how are the voters responding to this? I kind of wonder if the AI industry might create a Streisand effect for themselves where they sort of end up doing their own cause more harm than good. Because I think they should maybe look at some of the polling numbers on just like how popular AI is before they get too confident with, some of their messaging. So a lot there, but what do you, what's your side of that story?
Yeah, you're spot on in your analysis. So I am running for Congress in a very crowded field. There's, I think, 10 declared candidates already in the middle of Manhattan. And this super PAC called Leading the Future was formed over the summer and was given $100 million funded by Andreessen Horowitz, by Greg Brockman, by Joe Lonsdale, by Ron Conway, and said they would go after basically anyone who was imposing regulation on AI. And There's actually funny politics over the summer where Trump initially opposed it and said, don't support any Democrat that is like pro AI, like you should just be a Republican. And so, but anyway, they came out with two people so far who they've named, me, who they named public enemy number one. And then there's someone running for Congress, I think in Texas, a Republican who they really support. And the ad in support of the Republican barely mentions technology. It's just, this is a Trump loving Republican and vote for him there. For me, they're actually very straightforward. And to be clear, these are smart political operatives who are doing it. I do not think they are dumb.
Mm-hmm.
But if you were just trying to bury someone, what you would do is you would wait until 3 weeks before the primary. And you would put a bunch of negative ads on whatever the polls told you was most salient, not about the issue that you actually care about. And you do it right at the end so that disclosures would come out after the primary when it's too late for anyone to take that into account. What they did here is the opposite of that in every way. They announced early on who they were, that they were targeting me, that they were targeting me specifically about AI. And started putting ads out saying, don't vote for Alex because he'll regulate AI. And you're absolutely right. These ads, I think, are net positive for me, not only boosting my name ID in a crowded field, but saying that I want to regulate AI, which is a very popular position. So the question is, if they're smart, why are they doing it this way? And there's two clear answers to that. The first is that they want to discourage any other candidate from making AI part of their platform, right? It is clear that regulating AI is popular. People are figuring out what they're going to run on. They want to put a stake in the ground that they are coming after you if you ever want to regulate it, right? And the second reason is because the RAISE Act is currently before the governor. Their ad against me talked a little bit about me. It talked a lot about the RAISE Act, and it had a lot of images of Albany and said, Albany is dysfunctional. Albany is dysfunctional. It was a very obvious message to the governor that they would come after her if she ended up signing a strong version of this bill. And so, you know, it is often difficult to separate the politics from the policy, but in this case, they're being explicit in tying those two together.
Fascinating. And you think it is, I mean, I don't know if it's too early to have metrics on this, but you think it is actually benefiting you in your race?
So far. Now, listen, they originally said they were going to spend $2 million against me. Then I got a bunch of free press out of that. I got a surge in donations. I got a surge in volunteers. So they then upped it to they're going to spend at least $10 million against me. And I think if I keep at this pace, I could use up all 100 million of the super PAC and have to spare any other candidate from dealing with them. But you know, it will be bad 3 weeks before the primary when they are dumping a bunch of negative ads. But so far, it's been very, very beneficial to me. But you know, that still means I'm going to need a lot of support from people so that when all of that negative stuff is on the air even more, I can get my message out and fight back.
So I have a question for you, because unlike some of the other anti-AI candidates, I think you have been also clear that there are opportunities in AI.
Totally.
And I think this morning, Bernie Sanders put out a little bit of a spiel about how you know, they should block data centers and data center construction should be blocked, and this is something of the 1%, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So far, very, very negative reaction among the tech crew, both left wing and right wing. What do you think about that? How do you connect? That, you know, a lot of the economic growth in the country right now is being generated by construction for AI data centers, and a lot of the jobs are being generated, you know, and a lot of them are union jobs too, electricians, you know, construction workers, et cetera. And how do you connect that with on the left wing of the party, at least, this kind of, you know, want to total shutdown on data centers?
I don't support a total moratorium on data centers, to be clear. What Senator Sanders is reflecting, though, is that people feel like this is moving too fast, and they feel like they don't have a say in how the technology develops. And it's being decided by 5 people. and Americans deserve a democracy where we actually get to influence this. So,
Mhm.
what I would do on data centers, and to your point, I see the potential gains from AI. I use AI all the time right now, but I also, especially when it comes to medical research and curing diseases. I mean, my mom has multiple sclerosis, and autoimmune diseases are some of the most difficult to understand. I'm really bullish on the ability of AI to have medical discoveries. It's just that the same pathways that allow you to have a medical discovery could allow you to build a bioweapon. And it's because I'm so bullish on the capabilities that I think there needs to be regulation. On data centers in particular, the American grid is so old and so in need of upgrades, and we need way more power as well. And we have stumbled into a situation where there seems to be near unlimited private capital willing to pay for a specific thing if we
Mhm.
set up the incentives correctly.
Yeah.
So what I would love to see the federal government do is, instead of allowing states to be played off each other, and instead of allowing long permitting times, to have clear incentives set up where, I can't get new renewable online for 4 years. That's way too long to benefit from a data center. But what I can do is go to a old coal plant that still has approval and fire it back up again. Or I can go to a nuclear plant and say, hey, sell less to the grid and give me some directly for a data center. And so that's what's happening right now. And that's why we're seeing even dirtier and dirtier power support this. I would love to see the federal government say, we will streamline permitting. We will make it much easier for you to connect if you use a certain percentage renewable, right? It's tough to say 100% because you need base loads and storage, but like a certain set renewable, and you pay for the upgrade, you pay for the interconnect to the grid, so that doesn't get passed to ratepayers, and ratepayers aren't subsidizing this, right? I think if you did that, you could have a huge benefit to our grid that helps everyone, and not require a lot of federal money in order to do that. So I think there's a lot of creative things we could be doing here.
It's time to
Indeed.
build, as they say. Dean is here. So just maybe one more question. I really am super curious about your answer on this one. With respect to Palantir, you worked at the company. I find, AI scrambles all kind of politics. Everything is kind of topsy-turvy. But I'm struck by the sort of right-coded politics now seemingly being simultaneously super anti-China because they're a totalitarian state and, we wouldn't want to live that way. And at the same time, bringing this sort of mass surveillance tech to our own country, right? And we've just had like an announcement, for example, that people that want to come visit are apparently going to have to hand over their social media. And I assume it's going to be AI reading, into that social media background to figure out, who's desirable or not to visit here on vacation. I'm not sure exactly what the, what we're supposed to be getting from that, but Palantir would, potentially be the kind of company that the US government would engage to do it. So if you end up winning this election and going to Congress, how do you think you will engage with the fact that, and Palantir's always quick to say, well, we're only doing stuff that's legal. But Zvi, our first guest today, is very often points out that so many things in society kind of rest on the assumption that certain things are hard to do. They're not actually scalable. They're costly. So it might be legal, but people aren't going to do it all the time. AI obviously, challenges that assumption in a very fundamental way. The key question is like, how would you engage with these sort of government contracting with a company like Palantir to spin up these sort of, in my view, kind of uncomfortably China-like surveillance operations? Where do you draw the line? Do you even trust Palantir? Do you trust Palantir, the company? Take that in any direction that you want, but I'm very curious as to what you would support and oppose in Congress.
It's a lot there. I'll try to be quick because I really want to hear from Dean too. So you have a great next guest coming on. So I was at Palantir for 4.5 years. I worked almost entirely on the federal civilian side. So I helped the Department of Veterans Affairs better staff their hospitals and ensure that veterans get the care that they need and deserve. I helped the Department of Justice tackle the opioid epidemic by finding doctors that were committing fraud against Medicare and Medicaid to do pill mill operations and just get people hooked on opioids. I worked with the CDC to better track epidemics. Like, I'm very proud of the work that I did while I was there. And also, I left in 2019 because they renewed a contract with ICE to allow the software to continue to be used for deportations. And I didn't think that was the right thing for me to be working on. And so I took a stand there. The question on the social media coming from the airports and travel aid is like, that shouldn't be the policy of the United States. We should be quite clear, not only because of basic human rights and privacy rights, but also we're a country of immigrants, and we're also a country that depends on people coming in and working here. I represent New York City, where we want people to come visit. We want people from all over there, and making that harder is such a self-defeating policy. So I think the broad policies of what we should and should not be doing and what people's rights are should be set in Congress. It's just we've had a Congress that hasn't gotten anything done for far too long. And I think we need to send people there that are actually focused on doing things.
Indeed. And I think, we may not have the same politics, but I do want to see more people who are more technically competent in Congress. So I wish you luck, Alex.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
All right.
Appreciate you being here.
Thanks for being here. And everyone feel free to stay in touch at Alex Boris on Twitter and alexboris.nyc. Appreciate it.
We'll be
Cheers.
following.
Next up, we have Dean Ball. Let me get Dean on.
Hey, how's it going?
Hi, Dean.
Welcome. Thanks for joining.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Good to be doing this.
So, Dean, you were the policy advisor on artificial intelligence. You were at the White House Office of Science and Technology, and then you left to. You said, I remember your tweet. You said you were a writer at heart, and you decided to leave. So, how are things going? What are you looking at right now?
Well, I mean, so the 4 months since I left government have been like among the most productive in my life. There's just all these very cool opportunities to do interesting and I think positive things. And so the main thing I've been struggling with actually is like what to say no to, and like sort of like what the actual, like what is it that I want to accomplish here. And so, but I've loved being able to sort of speak openly again, particularly because like, I think in my view, this year alone, we've had kind of two major moments that have redefined, at least for me, like the level of utility that this technology has to me. And those were for me, like 03 was one, which actually came sort of right as I entered, same week I entered government is when 03 came out. And then in the last couple of weeks, my view is that the sort of coding agents from the at the frontier are like kind of there, and they can kind of do like basically anything you ask them to. And so, it's just kind of been an incredible year in so many ways. And I've been enjoying being able to talk about it.
Can you talk a little bit? I know you heard at least the second half of our chat with Alex. What do you make of this dynamic where, it violates my intuitions in so many ways to see a CS master's worked at Palantir with, I would say, relatively light touch, kind of echoing the, the company's preparedness framework constructs in legislation, becoming the subject of attacks, which are, it sounded pretty honorable to me in the sense that they were at least talking about the issue that they really care about in the public, which is not always the case, right? In these sort of political operative type situations, but he thinks it's helping him. What is going on? Can you make sense of this?
I mean, yeah, no, it's the politics of AI. Politics of AI are in a very interesting state of sort of transition right now. I think the dice are really still in the air in terms of what the coalitions are going to be. It's undoubtedly the case that there's going to be there's substantial public sentiment on AI, negative sentiment. Thus far it's negative sentiment, but sort of low salience, so low importance. But when you do ask people, so it's like oftentimes it'll be like the 6th or 7th priority of voters, which basically means for like electoral purposes, it's not really a priority. In certain districts, that won't be true. All politics is local, blah, blah, blah. So I think the coalitions are in a state of flux right now, and I have
so
said,
what-
oh, sorry,
Just to interrupt you, before we go into coalitions, what are the factions forming these coalitions?
yeah, well, so I mean, I think even that is in a state of transition, but I think, you have obviously like the traditional AI safety world.
Mhm.
And then you might have like the sort of pro AI, industry heavy type of camp. Though it's not only industry, there's plenty of just like, other people in it, myself included, by the way.
Mhm. Mhm.
And then you have what I would describe as this sort of emerging anti-AI, like truly not like AI safety, but anti-AI. Those are different things. I think that's really important to understand. Like, I don't think of Assemblymember Bora as a anti-AI person. I think of him as someone who is concerned about some aspects of AI safety, and I think there's pretty good reason for a lot of those things to be concerned. And so this anti-AI coalition is like, there's people on the left. You have Bernie Sanders saying we're going to ban the data centers. You have people on the right that are also sort of doing this, saying these kinds of things. And I think then you have kind of a bunch of people that are also worried about things like kids' safety, sort of more like consumer protection style harms. And so the real question is like, there's these two groups in the middle of like, I'm worried about kids' safety and I'm more of a traditional AI safety person. And the question is like, which direction fundamentally are those people in the middle going to orient themselves towards? Are they going to decide that they're fundamentally anti-AI people, or are they going to decide that they're like fundamentally, yeah, we want this technology, we want it to go well, and we think we need guardrails for that? It's a really interesting question.
Is there another faction? Because I often note that, there have been several comments, we're not going to allow what happened to social media to happen to AI. And
right.
mainly not just about the safety aspects, but I think there was some loss of control that happened from, I think, public leaders to social media. They saw a loss of control.
Yeah.
Which I often say social media was actually the first proto AI, and which already caused this kind of loss of control that the AI safety people were worried about, and that elected leaders could actually see it happen as they lost control of mass media and it became a social media, which is mediated by these algorithms which delivered information to people, right?
Yep.
So to what extent do you think it's caused by this already kind of like fear of loss of control to AI?
Yeah, no, I mean, there definitely is some of that, and some of it I think is like this question of alignment, right? Of like, well, did the algorithms of social media were they incentivized to do things that were actually good for society at large, or was it sort of more locally optimal but maybe globally quite profoundly suboptimal? And I think that there's like, those are like important questions to ask, and we see the exact same questions present themselves in AI today, right? Like GPT-4o and sycophancy is a good example of this. I think kind of a lot of the RLHF, sort of heavily RLHF models have this sort of, especially like from the earlier part of this year, had a lot of these issues. Seems like they're getting better now, but yeah, like we see some of those same issues. At the same time, it's very easy to fight old battles. And so I see a lot of people that say that sort of thing. Really, they're viewing AI almost entirely as a consumer technology like social media. And that causes, I think, a relatively myopic frame that in many ways totally misses the point. And the only other thing I would say, though, is like, you're totally right that there's ways in which social media has challenged traditional institutions of media and the state in some ways. Like, really, social media is like an authority destroyer. If you were like an old storied source of authority in society, and credibility or whatever, social media has a tendency to erode that kind of thing. And there's ways in which that's good, but there's also ways in which that's like, quite bad. And yeah, I do think there's some people who really understand this acutely. I would point to like Josh Hawley. I think Josh Hawley is like one of his true underlying concerns. He only talks about it sometimes, but I really think one of his foundational concerns, Senator Josh Hawley from Missouri, a Republican, I think a big part of his concern is like this balance of power between basically corporate power on the internet and the government.
Indeed. I also note that for some of them, it's a question of wanting to tax the income stream,
Oh,
which
yeah.
they see that the big firms have a very enormous income stream right now. And I think, for example, you can see it in kind of Marsha Blackburn in Tennessee. You can see a large portion of the regulation that they want to put forward is to protect artists in Nashville who they're afraid are going to lose their livelihoods because
Yeah.
of corporate power in California.
Yeah. For sure. I mean, of course, whenever people talk about, oh, we have to protect creators from AI, I think to myself, like, well, in some ways, like all three of us are like creators, of different kinds of stuff on the internet. And like, speaking for myself, I can just personally say, like, I don't really think any of that stuff particularly protects me. Feels like it's more about protecting holders of very large IP portfolios. So it's like, the interests of Disney and the News Corporation and similar large media conglomerates, I don't think their interests, like, we shouldn't factor in their interests to nothing, right? It's not like but like, my only point is, like, let's not pretend this is some populist cause where we're like defending the copyright, of like, we're pretending the intellectual property rights of, like, the proverbial musician on the street, with a dream and a guitar, right? I don't really think that's what's happening here. We're protecting Taylor Swift, who's like a billionaire, and that's fine. But, come on. I guess that's my
to
only
protect myself, I would like to propose a ban on Notebook LM, so that everybody has to listen to real human voices.
point. Yes.
Okay, here's a question I really want to get your take on. And obviously there's a certain, he who must always be named that I think of as kind of a great example of this. An idiosyncratic person, you've called a political genius, and I think it's hard to argue with that, but who has made some kind of perplexing moves recently in terms of an EO, which I think seems to be not popular among his base, right? If I understand those politics correctly, like, my sense is that people who voted for the president did not do it so that the president would take away states' rights to regulate technology. On the other hand, we're now going to sell H200s to China. So you can comment on those, like, particular details of those perhaps surprising actions if you want to. But then zooming out, if I think about, like, what really matters in history, I would usually think of myself as more of a structuralist thinker, that's like, what are the really, kind of core technology drivers or the core economic drivers? And then, of course, you've got, people sort of squabbling for position on top of those more fundamental dynamics. But I don't tend to think of the, like, individual leaders being, like, super key forces that shape history. Until right now, I'm kind of like, oh my God, maybe this is a sort of moment in history where the great man of history theory could perhaps have a lot more to say for it, because so much is up in the air that maybe these, like, individual decisions, like selling H200s to China, really could, become, like, historical hinge points. How do you think about that?
So I think you're spot on, that, like, right now we are in a moment. I mean, I think that Donald Trump, say what you want about him, I do think he will probably go down as being, like, a great man of history, a person who, like, really changed the orientation of this country, changed sort of the lexicon of our statecraft and our civic life. Like, and I think, if we're being honest, like, with anyone like that, where you're living through the impact of what they're doing, I think you have to be honest that history will be the judge of all this. I think that, like, in terms of the specifics, maybe, like, so I think the president is, one thing on the right that I think a lot of people don't understand, like a lot of the people who would be opposed to something like preemption, or at least would say they are, is, like, they have this belief that, like, the president has been corrupted by the tech industry, that, like, it's the tech industry pulling the strings here, and the president couldn't possibly disagree with them on the core of this issue. And it's like, no, the president does. Like, the president cares himself about the issue of preemption. It's very clear from the way he talks about it. It's very clear from how consistent he's been on this issue. He personally cares about it. He personally wants to do this. And, he's ultimately a leader. He's going to lead the party where he thinks it needs to go, what he thinks is in the best interest of the country. And I think he's right that preemption is in the best interest of the country. In terms of the H200 thing, I mean, so much has been said about that. You know, I think it's like we'll see what China even does. Like, are they even going to take the chips? How many are actually going to move? It's so hard to exactly know. I personally, like, I think we need to be balancing here between, like, we want China to not like completely abandon. We want to make sure that we are selling stuff that is better than the best stuff they can produce. Such that like we do maintain some ecosystem advantages that are real, right? Like there's Chinese engineers who help optimize, you know, who help write CUDA kernels and do other sorts of optimizations to the basic infrastructure of machine learning. And like that is a big part of how NVIDIA achieves performance, is through the contributions of this ecosystem. And so in many ways, like those things have benefits, not just for NVIDIA, but for American developers of all sorts who are building within the NVIDIA ecosystem. That's an important thing. It's, and I mean, other just sort of US ecosystems in general, right? That's an important thing. I would say it's not like, you know, is it the most important thing we need to be thinking about in the context of this competition? No, it's one of many important things. So you have to balance that with the national security issues. And we'll see. Kind of also China has to do their own balancing act. So we'll see where they, we'll see what they actually do. It's fascinating.
On the China point, I was really struck recently. I ran your discussion with Max Tegmark as a cross post on the Cognitive Revolution.
Thank you.
And in scrolling through the names of people who signed on to the superintelligence ban statement that you guys were debating, two names jumped out at me above all others. One was Steve Bannon.
Yep.
The other was the CEO of Zhipu AI, or Z.ai, which is one of maybe the top 5 or 6 Chinese AI companies. They're the makers of GLM. The latest one is GLM 4.6. So that's kind of odd. What do you make of it? I don't know. Is there any, I mean, it seems like we are maybe in a sort of Nixon goes to China proto moment here, perhaps. Is there any, do you have any optimism for that?
I mean, maybe, right? You know, I think this is where the whole great man of history versus structural forces thing is really going to come to a head, because my view of the situation, and I've written this publicly, is that we are in a state of structural decoupling from China, that it doesn't actually matter. In other words, if I'm right, it doesn't matter who the president is, unless the US government starts to take way more control over the economy. Unless we become more centrally planned as an economy. But if we don't, and we continue to have a market economy, which means that private capital allocators make choices about how to allocate capital, they're going to look at the policy landscape and it's going to be like, well, look, I can't rely on China for rare earths because they've just expressed a willingness to like use this entire supply chain to derail my business. So I can't do, like, I'm the fiduciary of a company. I cannot do that. You know, we've already seen US companies do that, and a lot of them are doing much more of it right now. So we're in this sort of state of structural decoupling. China is exporting all this stuff, which does lower prices, but it also competes with domestic industries, not just here, but everywhere. And so there's a lot of people that are having problems with this all over the world and are like, what are we going to do about this? Like, it seems like what China wants to do is extract raw resources from my country and transform them in its own country to things that it sells back to me. And that's basically how China views the future of the world, which is like not a very cooperative or positive vision for the vast majority of people that are not in China. And I don't even think it's that good of a vision for the people in China, honestly. I think it's a good vision for the Chinese government. And that's about it. So, you know, I think we're in this structural, you know, decoupling. The president thinks differently. And I mean, my read on the president is that, like, he is genuinely interested. He doesn't want to be the person who started 100-year civilizational grand competition. He wants to be the person who established a framework for peaceable relations between our countries and therefore really for the world. He wants world. I mean, he really does genuinely want world peace. And maybe he can do it. You know, I'm not going to bet against POTUS. He has surprised me way too much for me to bet against him. So, you know, we'll see who's right. But I think that's what it's going to come down to. That's kind of my view.
Indeed, Dean.
can do it.
Thank you for joining us.
Can I do
were like-
one more? Peter,
Yeah,
is,
yeah.
so we don't
Yeah,
have too
we're
much more
rushed for
time.
time, but yeah, go ahead.
We've done it for me. This is a pretty admirable job of staying on time. Although we're now 6 and probably headed there 8 minutes late for Peter, so not perfect. But one thing you tweeted recently, Dean, that I thought was quite interesting and quite true is that for the purposes of making sense of what's going on in AI, a lot of the best information is private and is sort of circulated,
Yeah.
person to person at the proverbial San Francisco parties, what have you.
Yep.
So we're going to next talk about what to expect in 2026 with Peter, but what could you share in, sufficiently abstracted terms so as to not, cause yourself or your sources problems that would help people who are not as plugged into the Whisper networks have a better sense of what to expect in the next year?
What to expect in the next year? Well, I mean, so I think very broadly, there's a lot of things in AI right now that are just like, there's a lot of stuff that's quiet because it's sort of politically incorrect almost. Like I felt like yesterday I made the pronouncement that I feel like Claude Opus 4.5 and Claude Code is like kind of just AGI, basically, according to like some definitions at least. That's the kind of thing that is like fairly politically incorrect to say. And like might have been like a lot of people might say it like behind closed doors, but you don't, because you don't want to, there's so much career risk of like, oh, am I going to be the guy who came out and said this thing is AGI? AGI is an unserious concept, blah, 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 blah. I kind of think that one of the things I would guess is that the conversation will in some ways become a little bit more candid, I hope, over the next year, just because some of the realities are going to be harder to deny. And so there's a lot of things right now that like on both sides, there's a lot of like foundational assumptions that both sides have stuck to throughout the year that have sort of undergirded their rhetoric and points of view. And I sort of wonder whether that it's not that they'll like be totally, neutral or whatever. It's more that I think that the assumptions will start to change. And therefore
the load-bearing assumptions are starting to go away.
Yeah, I think the aperture of like stuff you can say and policies you can contemplate will widen. I basically think the Overton window will widen. And, I think other stuff too, like the models are going to be really good and there'll probably be autonomous cyber attacks and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. The first drop-in knowledge workers expected Q2 2026, from what I understand as well. Amazing. Well, Dean, thank you very much for joining. I appreciate your participation in our live experiment today. And it's always great to get your take on these big picture questions. You're a unique thinker and we appreciate it.
Hey, thanks guys for having me. It's been fun.
I wish we had more time.
Next time. All right. See you guys. Enjoy the rest of this. Bye.
And next up, we have Peter Wildeford. He is the co-founder of Metaculus. He is a policy strategist. He is the globally top-ranked top 20 forecaster. This is going to be exciting. Here we go.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me. Sorry to take you away from Dean, but happy to be here. By the way, I'm not the co-founder of Metaculus. I wish. I'm on the board of Metaculus. I'm an avid Metaculus participant, but yeah, so I work at the Institute for AI Policy and Strategy.
You guys are, since we were just talking about chips, you have been a opponent of selling chips to China. I think that's fair to say. What's your take on the latest development?
Yeah, I mean, I think my take is that, like, obviously there's something to be said about wanting to undermine demand for Huawei chips. But I think the mistake that people make is that they assume that China is like a capitalist country and will respond to supply and demand the way that other countries do. And that's just like clearly not the case. Like the Chinese government will make sure that Huawei has unlimited demand for their products. Right now, Huawei can only supply like 1 to 4% of Chinese demand. And the Chinese government is going to make sure that there are companies to take that demand by law, by soft requirement. And so then the question is like, well, what about the remaining 96% that's like not being able to be filled by Huawei? Well, I think in that case, like that's where NVIDIA is kind of a useful idiot. Like they're kind of filling in that like missing 96%. And China's going to be like, thank you for helping turbocharge our AI industry. But then the moment Huawei can take in more and more demand, the government's going to be pushing out NVIDIA and they're going to be promoting Huawei, putting really, really firm thumbs on the scale there. And that's what China's done in every other industry. Like Tesla's come to China thinking they can sell a ton of electric vehicles. They got pushed out for BYD. Lots of other companies think they're going to like, Apple thought they would be selling a lot of devices in China, got pushed out also for Huawei. Like the Chinese government, like Uber, I think also got pushed out. Just like this is how it works in every industry. And so I think we need to have more of an understanding of how supply and demand actually works in China, and like how these chips like are actually being used or not used to like what is the like how is Huawei being undermined? Like I really don't think they're being undermined at all. I think China's kind of, they're having their cake and eating it too by boosting Huawei domestically and also leapfrogging off of NVIDIA chips. So I feel quite strongly about that.
So what would you say if the chips issue was put in as a part of a strategy to kind of stress the Chinese government into overspending? So it's not that the US policymakers really believe in AGI or ASI, but it is kind of a red flag to a bull, kind of causing the Chinese government to overcommit on construction, overcommit on chips. At the same time, they're going to have to match SpaceX on launches. They have a real estate bubble which has just burst, and they're trying to address that. So they've got all of these things going on at the same time. A lot of needs for capital, a lot of capital burn. BYD and the other EV companies are now are all negative capital, and the government is having this anti-involution kind of campaign to prevent people from producing at massive losses. So basically, it's similar to the strategy that the U.S. used against the USSR, which was to start off the Strategic Defense Initiative, stress the USSR on spending. At the same time, oil prices went down. The USSR then had a collapse. So in the same way, this is maybe even policymakers do not believe in AGI or ASI, but it is a very useful kind of way to encourage spending in China and overspending and overcommitment on these strategies.
Yeah, I mean, with all due respect, I do think that's kind of a bit of a galaxy-brained take. Like it seems to be really relying on second-order effects and ignoring like the primacy of the first-order effects. I think kind of like, I think if you believe, I guess what I do about AGI, ASI, like I think a lot of this like big spending is very rational. China might actually be underspending relative to the advantage that AI can create for a country when it becomes kind of like super powerful as I'm expecting. I think the US is if the US is going to win in AGI, it's going to be largely by outspending China, by having deeper capital markets. I think that's always been the US's strength, and I do think the Chinese government, the Chinese economy is under strain. I think China can only prop up the government so much. And I think that they had a lot of pain from zero COVID, which I think was a tremendously ill-advised policy, and I think shows that the Chinese government isn't omnicompetent. But I think if the US just wants to like trick China into spending, why not just like race to Mars or something? Like there's far more safe things we could be doing than giving China everything they need to like power their military, power their economy. And it's clear like China's weaponizing their AI against us. They're like cyber attacking us relentlessly. Like they're not playing fair with the technology that they're using with us. And they're also using AI to do tremendous human rights abuses domestically. And like I don't think it makes sense for us to be powering that.
So is that the core of your objection? I feel like one of the things that always gets kind of glossed over, or often gets glossed over in these sort of, why should we or shouldn't we sell chips to China debates is like, what is the actual threat model? My sense is like they have enough production to power their drones. They probably have enough production to power their surveillance stack. And, you know, even though at one point in time, right, I once ran a deep research report on the history of justifications for the chip ban. And it sort of started with like, well, we'll deny them the military, applications. But then it was like, well, we can't probably do that, but we can at least deny them the ability to make frontier models. And I was like, well, now we can't really do that. And the latest, version that I've heard from like Leonard, Heim, who's kind of, been a big advocate for this policy, is like, well, at least we'll have like a lot more AI agents than them. So like we'll be a lot more productive economically and they won't be. And when I hear that, I'm kind of like, I don't know, man, that sounds like not really super consistent with my values. Like I'd like to see the Chinese public enjoy the benefits of AI agents, in their day-to-day life as I hope to enjoy them in my life. It doesn't seem to me like we can really do much about their military applications or their surveillance tech or even their cyber attacks. Like those are going to happen. I also note that like my life goes on pretty well today without too much interference from actual cyber attack damages. So the other, of course, answer that people give is like, well, if they get this, then there will be like 5+ more companies in the AGI race. And that's just going to make the whole competitive dynamic worse. And we'll have even more of a, rapid race to the bottom. And that resonates with me a bit more, to be honest. But then I'm also kind of like, well, maybe we should regulate our own companies a little bit if we really want to do something about that. So I guess all that to say, like, there's kind of a menu there. You can take from the menu or go off menu. What is the like, core threat model that you really worry about when China gets chips?
Yeah, I mean, I want to be really clear. Like, it definitely should not and it cannot be the policy of the United States government that we want to make China poor. And like, we should not be trying to imply that to China at all. I think China deserves economic success as much as any country does, as much as the United States. And I completely agree. Like, I want the Chinese people and even the Chinese government to be benefiting from AI technology, even benefiting from American AI technology. I think when it comes to the chips in particular, though, I think the threat model is like kind of like once you give chips, you can't really take them back. I think it also is just it's really underrated. I think the amount of the current Chinese AI ecosystem, DeepSeek, Qwen, et cetera, that are being built on American chips. It was just reported by The Information that DeepSeek is smuggling American chips. I think if America really wanted to and like really could like crack down on chip smuggling, crack down on chip like sales, like I think China would be much further behind the frontier, especially with enough time for those policies to work. And I think like the core threat model is that I think AI will be kind of like able to, like you said, drop in remote workers earlier, like kind of drop in military analysts, drop in like military commanders. I think a lot of like military AI will be just like a tremendous strategic asset. And I think we want to be really careful about like, I mean, China has so much civil military fusion. I think unfortunately it's like very difficult to be giving China these equipment that then can be militarized. And like, if AGI does really take off, and if there is some like, God help us, some like US-China great power war, like we're not going to be wanting China to have all those like drop-in military strategists. Like we'll want the American military to have that. And so I would say like we should rent chips to China rather than sell them. We should make sure China can benefit from American AI rather than have the materials to compete with American AI. And we need to be careful, I think, about the military implications, kind of like how I think the United States should sell a lot of things to China, but we shouldn't be selling our fighter jets or our missiles to China. Like, I guess that's like obviously more of like a clear example, a little bit inflammatory deliberately, but kind of like the way I see chips and the way I think military will eventually be tremendously super powered by AI. I think that like is a non-trivial portion of the Chinese AI ecosystem and eventually their military capability. And I think we obviously are doing fine now, but like if we do need to be prepared for like some sort of Taiwan scenario, some type of great power war scenario. And we shouldn't be suffocating China in the quest to do that, but we should be kind of thoughtful about like what are we or are we not selling, and like what are those implications.
What is the difference between, let's say, China buying the chips and setting up data centers onshore, and ByteDance buying the chips in Singapore and deploying them in an Oracle data center in Malaysia across the border? Like, what
Yeah.
are the major, because and as you imply the civil military fusion, I'm sure ByteDance does some work for the government, right?
Yeah, I think they definitely do. I mean, I think the biggest difference with renting chips as opposed to buying is that if there were some sort of war, you could always turn the chips off. If they're like kind of more on Malaysian shores, like yeah, we just have like so much ability. Like if they're controlled by Oracle, we just have so much more ability to shut them off if we think that they're being misused. And then I think also there's like a bit of a dynamic in China too, where the military will be tremendously disincentivized to use Malaysian data centers because they don't want the United States like spying on their military like workloads. But commercially, I would imagine Chinese companies would be happy to use Malaysian Oracle run chips. So like that, I think that actually is a great way to benefit the Chinese people economically without benefiting Chinese militarily.
Interesting.
Yeah, I like that a
maybe
lot.
maybe to,
Rent don't
maybe to
sell
segue
makes a lot of
to
sense to me.
Nathan, go ahead.
No, I was just saying I like the rent don't sell paradigm a lot. Seems to
Yeah.
have a little lag.
I mean, yeah, I think rent don't sell is my favorite way of trying to square the two things of like, yeah, I mean, I am definitely like a China hawk, but like again, I really don't want the Chinese people to be poor. This is not like an economic war against China. This is just like sensible military policy. And I think permitting renting but not selling them the chips, I think is the best way to square that. I know other people disagree with me on the renting thing, and I'm happy to have that debate with them as well. I guess this sort of feels like maybe a more moderate position in that case.
Indeed. I'm going to add this to the stage, which is the famous Arc AGI one leaderboard with the 390 times improvement in 1 year. I think that you had a tweet that this was surprising to you, or?
Yeah, I mean, I do think it is surprising. So one of my favorite things about this evaluation is like, I mean, I feel like every eval we ever see like emphasizes like, oh my gosh, like AI is improving so much in like ability to get stuff done and capability, and like that's super cool. But I think what goes a bit unnoticed is just like how much cheaper it's getting to do things as well. Like, so the old capabilities you used to be able to do just barely can now be done by like open source models, and maybe even models that you can run on your laptop, and soon models you can run on your phone. And I think that has a lot of implications as well in terms of like what we're going to be able to do with AI. And I'm very excited about that. And so I think just kind of seeing like, wow, like not only is there like tremendous increase in capability, but tremendous increase in affordability. And like you kind of like get to multiply that like affordability times capability. And I think that just really, yeah, shows an awful lot of opportunity, especially as that presumably will keep continuing.
Is this one of the trends that you foresaw in your 2025 forecast? Did this surprise you?
Yeah, I mean, I must admit that I didn't like look at this trend in particular, but I guess I do, yeah, find myself sometimes a bit surprised by, yeah, just like how quickly it is that you can take existing capabilities and like just make them a lot cheaper, even sometimes only over a matter of months.
I looked back at our respective AI 2025 predictions, and not
Nice.
surprisingly, yours seem to hold up a little bit better than mine. I kind of overestimated the benchmark scores by a bit, pretty much across the board. You were a little more accurate. I think I was a little closer to the revenue number, though, which was the one number that really blew out relative to the the sort of aggregate community forecast. So this is kind of an interesting tension where the benchmarks haven't gone quite as far as I expected, but the revenue has really ramped. And then when you juxtapose that against the fact that like the same capabilities are getting dramatically cheaper, and yet we are still kind of telling ourselves, all that so far would suggest that like, well, we must be seeing just like infinite use on these sort of mundane tasks. But then we also have the narrative that like, well, we haven't really seen much economic impact yet. So how do we square, those three things? Like that, obviously progress has been pretty significant, but a little less than I expected. Revenue growth has been huge, even as costs has come down. And yet we still are like, where's the impact? Like, what do you make of that sort of very seemingly confusing constellation of facts?
Yeah, that is confusing. I must admit, I made a pretty big mistake when trying to forecast revenue for this year, which is basically at the end of the year, companies, OpenAI, Anthropic, etc., all just like reported, here's how much revenue we expect to make over the next year. And I thought like, oh, well, those are the company's official projections. Like, surely they know much more about revenue than I do. Like, surely you can just like sum them up and that's total revenue. And like, why would you try to do something else? And I think like, yeah, one thing I learned this year was like, I guess when companies put together their revenue projections, they have to use like really standard economic models and math, and they're not allowed to like account for the craziness of AI progress, because that's just like unprecedented, and you're not allowed to like put unprecedented stuff in your economic models or you look unserious. And so I guess, in retrospect, I think that was like a really dumb prediction on my part. I definitely should have known that like, oh, the revenue will obviously be a lot higher, because I was expecting AI progress that wasn't being priced in by like the standard economic models, which I think are primarily backward looking. I think like it seemed like revenue this year was like kind of really explosive off of coding models in particular, like Claude Code, Cursor, Windsurf, etc. Like that really sort of was a breakout use case. I was expecting like one thing I was a little kind of, you said like overestimating capabilities a bit. I was expecting more economic value just from like other sorts of computer use agents besides coding. That kind of didn't really take off this year. It wasn't really the year of the agent as much as like I or others might have said. But like I think AI just became tremendously good at coding in particular, as like Dean Ball was talking about, and that just ended up being a very economically valuable use case. Like I'm always surprised. Like I was literally a professional software engineer, data scientist for 5 years. I was coding every single day, hours on end. And even these days, like Claude Code, so much faster, so much better than me. I basically like rarely write code myself anymore. Just like always would rather like have Claude Code spit it out for me, at least for the first draft. So I was very impressed by that.
Yeah, I think, just to add to that point, the thing that I always point out is that the CFO of the company has to have some sense of reality when dealing with like investors. And so the researchers do not. So there's this gap between the researchers and the management. And the CFO often, externally facing, has a certain number of things that they are allowed to say and a certain number of things that they are not allowed to say. And one of those things is, declaring a 10x on revenue in any year is not something that anyone will take you seriously, because they will ask you, what is the product that you have? Who are the customers that you have signed? How is this, how does this money come in, right? And just to take a step back, Claude Code at the beginning of this year, they launched it late last year. It had pickup, but it didn't have this kind of 10x pickup. It was growing very strongly, but to 10x in 1 year is amazing. It's fantastic. I also wonder, to what extent do you think they can 10x again next year? Because again, projections for next year are kind of like 2x to 3x for each of these firms. Do you think they're going to exceed again?
Yeah. I mean, I would think yes. I mean, I admit there is a certain level of 0 to 1 where like people weren't using AI at all, and now they are using AI, and like maybe some of that can't be recaptured, and so that obviously would like slow growth down a bit. But like, I mean, I think kind of like the true like game-changing AI use cases like still aren't really here. Like if if companies actually can land something that is like akin to like a drop-in remote worker or like drop-in management consultant or something, like companies pay like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year for that sort of thing. Like, we're not talking about like $20 a month for your Claude Code subscription, but like 20,000 a month for your like remote worker subscription. And yeah, and so again, I think it really sort of depends on like, yeah, can this like train of increased capability continue? And like, yeah, like I really think computer use agents could be enormously economically valuable if they could actually be delivered in a sufficiently reliable way that like meets the promises that people have, like myself, have been hyping up a lot over the past few years.
What are the sources that you are watching? You mentioned obviously like the company's official revenue projections. We've got, obviously Twitter, where people are sounding off all the time. I do find that honestly to be still my primary source of up-to-date information. But then there's all these prediction markets as well, some of which are more kind of like Metaculus is a little bit more geared toward like the true, forecaster, and then others are more kind of betting markets. Interestingly, it seems like recently we've seen sort of a surge of insider activity on some of the betting markets, which has been a really interesting phenomenon. But what are the sort of, SIGINT sources that you are tuning into to make sure you are as informed as possible that you would recommend other people pay more attention to as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're totally right. Twitter's my go-to as well. Also, yeah, pretty happy with V's like aggregation of Twitter on his Substack. I think a lot of other Substacks are pretty excellent as well. Yeah, like Tim Lee's like Understanding AI or Nathan Lambert's Substack, I definitely like a lot. I'm also, a big fan of following Semi-Analysis, following Epoch AI, following Meter. I think kind of these organizations that have like a reputation for not like hyping stuff up, not vague posting, but like kind of really getting into the details of like, where is AI on these evaluations? Like, how are things trending? And more importantly, like, what do these evaluations actually mean? And like, what are they covering and what are they not? Something I've really liked seeing from Epoch AI, for example, is like just seeing like real professional mathematicians like comment on how useful they're finding AI math assistants. And like I think Daniel Litt, for example, on Twitter, like a lot of times when a new AI model comes out, he like puts it through its paces with his like professional mathematics work. And I mean, these are like AI systems that can like win mathematics challenges, and they're like definitely seem to be approaching some level of value, but they still seem to, and they're doing so well on this like frontier math benchmark, but they still seem to be lacking in like their ability to deliver for professional mathematicians. But like, I think as that changes, we'll be kind of seeing from these like in-person taste testers. I've also been kind of like taste testing the models myself, especially with more like writing or policy analysis tasks that I think are just like not really well covered by benchmarks. Yes, like I think getting like a holistic picture seems important. I also like that like Meter looks into reliability as well, because I think it can be like one thing to do well on some like hard problems in a benchmark, but like another thing to be like reliably delivering in a professional world. Like, for example, if like I only succeeded at like 80% of my policy analysis, I don't think I would be keeping my job very long. And so like, it's just like the jaggedness of these models, like they can succeed a lot, but then just like mess up on something really stupid, like makes it a bit harder for them to be a drop-in worker right now, as opposed to like a working assistant, which I use them for in an assistant way.
Do you assign like a probability of being correct or wrong, like handicap some of these organizations and statistics more than others?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. Like, I mean, I've always been, a bit frustrated, I think, especially by OpenAI, where they like do all these like vague posting, hyping their models, like posting Death Star on Twitter and talking about how their model is going to be like, or like, I think Elon Musk, like every single model he's ever built, he's like, oh, this is the one that's going to be AGI. and you're just like, yeah, come on, like stop doing that. Like it's just really unhelpful and like also needlessly stress inducing for those of us trying to follow this kind of stuff. I feel like now you can just sort of tune it out. But yeah, I think like it was just like adding more noise than signal in the past. Yeah, so I mean, usually when models come out, I just advise everyone to like ignore the news for the first 24 hours. Like every tester's like, oh, I got early access to model X and it like was the best model ever, and it like did all my homework, and it like built me a new website, and it like cured cancer or whatever. And it's just like, well, the only reason those people tend to get early access is because they're gonna like write glowing things about every model no matter what. So like I really like, again, Epoch and Meter, organizations that like have more of a track record of like just kind of calling it as it is, as opposed to hyping up the model or saying that the model's stupid when it's not.
As we look ahead to 2026, I think it's hard to, when you get into forecasting, which I've done a little bit, a little lore about me, I participated in one of the original Good Judgment Project
Cool.
forecasting tournaments like 15 years ago. I did okay, but not as well as you. Actually did pretty well, but still not as well as you.
Nice.
One of the things that I've learned though in doing this is like, it is very much anchored in questions where you can get a number out, in a lot of cases, right? There's sort of, it tends to lend itself toward in paradigm changes. We have a benchmark, current number is X, what's it going to be at the end of the year? How do you think about things that are a little bit more paradigm shifting? Like if I were to ask you, what are the odds in 2026 that we get a new paradigm on the order of like the chain of thought reasoning paradigm that took us from sort of, language models 1.0 to 2.0, let's say. A 3.0 could be a bunch of different things. It could be a continual learning breakthrough. It could be something else. It could be, embodiment in some way, shape, or form. How do you think about trying to get a handle on those things, which are not like a well-defined, scale or move, but rather something that's like kind of qualitatively different than what we're currently dealing with?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's definitely an astute observation. I think with forecasting in particular, like there's so much fuss put on the task of like take an existing forecasting question that has well-defined resolution criteria and like put a number on it. And like that kind of activity, I think, is an activity I'm very good at and like does have a lot of value to people, but it's only like a small part of the overall like forecasting value chain. I think like two things that are really dismissed is first, like what questions are you asking in the first place? Like what are you actually posing to people? Like what are you allocating your attention to? And then secondly is like once you have this number, this prediction, like what do you actually do about it? Like how do you make decisions different than you otherwise would? And like, so I think like the full forecasting value chain is like way more than just like putting a number on stuff. It's also like, asking the right questions and doing the right things with the information. And I think like a lot of times, like a lot of AI forecasting can be really stuck in like assuming current paradigm continues and current paradigm is the only paradigm. When I think like looking back throughout history, like we have, I think, a decent amount of evidence that we get like new paradigms, like honestly, even like every 5 years, like twice per decade or so. So like it stands to reason like any particular year might have like at least a 10% chance of having some new paradigm developed that does like kind of qualitatively change model performance. I think like one of the interesting things also with the reasoning models is like we all kind of assumed pre-training was like the only kind of training. I think previously it was just called training, and you would just have like more and more flop for models, and you were expecting kind of more and more returns from that. But it kind of felt like pre-training, I guess, has like been burning out a bit. But like it started burning out a bit like right at the same time reasoning models started taking off. And so you almost like continued this like linear AI progress just through like a second era where like the first thing kind of stopped working, but this new thing picked up just in time to continue it. And so I think you could actually get maybe surprisingly linear progress despite like kind of a changing guard of paradigm. But I think definitely it's like sort of difficult black swan kind of events to like think about like, oh, will 2026 actually see some form of continuous online learning? Will it see some form of like, oh, like the chain of thought's no longer in English, now it's like thinking in like raw neural pattern, and that like improves its ability to like represent concepts, and it's just like so much better now? Or like, will there be some new data efficiency algorithm where like rather than requiring like 100,000 examples, it only requires like 10 or 15 like a human, and like it can like learn so much faster that way? Like I think we really haven't like scraped out like what's possible. So I think still like does kind of like widen your uncertainty definitely when thinking about next year or even the year after that.
What do you think the end of 2026 looks like? The most likely case in your mind, can be anything that you envision, but what do you think it feels like at the end of 2026?
Yeah, so I think by the end of 2026, I think you'll so like I mean one evaluation I've been tracking a lot that I like a lot is like Meter's evaluation, where they evaluate AI on their like ability to do software tasks, and then they like compare roughly like how long does it take human professionals to do that task. And right now AI is achieving like 50% reliability on tasks that take human professionals about 2 hours. And so like that's enough to get like reasonable value out of like Claude Code or something, but still like in the human is like very much involved. But I could see at the end of 2026, I think it could be possible that you could be having AI that could do like a day or two of human labor. So like it would just be like significantly more autonomous, significantly more able to just like run with things, do all the trial and error itself without like having human input every like 20 minutes like Claude Code currently does. And I think that really could transform transform kind of how we relate to AI and like what AI is capable of. I think one other interesting finding from Meter that they looked into was like also kind of it's not just software that is like increasing gradually in capabilities, but like kind of almost a lot of tasks you can measure, whether it be computer use or like economic analysis or like legal performance or like self-driving cars or anything, kind of have like similar capability increases over time, just starting from like much lower bases. So like right now, maybe an AI can only do like a 10-second computer task, and then it gets like confused or whatever. Like I would imagine by the end of the next year, like I would expect AI to be like using computers like kind of at least a human level. And so that I think that would really transform again what AI can do. Like if AI can sort of do, like, I mean, the computer right now, the internet's just kind of the gateway for like a lot of economic activity. And if you could start delegating that to AI and just have even like some semblance of reliability and like maybe even like multiple trials, like it tries 5 times to do the thing and messes up 4 times, but that like 5th time it like knows it succeeded, and then it like reports back. And maybe it's like horribly inefficient compared to a human doing it, but it's like so much cheaper, and it can also run while you're asleep or run while you're doing something else. Like I think that still would be pretty valuable. And I think that will like kind of, again, transform what we could be getting from AI. So I know I kind of said 2025 would be the year of the agent, and that sort of didn't really take off. But there has been a lot of improvement in computer use. And so I would think that like 2026 might be the year of the agent in some sense. I'm happy to just like repeat that prediction again and see if it sticks again this upcoming year.
What do you think will be the political ramifications of that? Because you've already got like, I think Senator Fetterman was, he wants, if you're going to have self-driving trucks, he wants a Teamsters representative on board. Bernie Sanders this morning with, moratorium and data center build outs. What do you think as you get to the year of the agent, what do you think the politics of this looks like at the end of the year?
Yeah, I mean, I think the politics will be heating up. Definitely, I think we've already been seeing that. I think 2026 will also like you'll be seeing Waymos and self-driving cars, way more commonplace. Hopefully, I could see like if there was some like AI agent, even if it did like fairly rudimentary things, like if it was like affordable and like fairly universally used, like I think that could be another sort of chat GPT moment, like kind of, yeah, in 2023, like the first like actually usable chatbot with a good UI. Like the trends were all there. Like all of us studying AI like weren't that surprised by chat GPT, but like because it had such a slick user interface, like it created like a transformation in politics. And then all of a sudden we were having like international summits on AI and stuff when previously it wasn't the talk of tech policy at all. I could see like, oh crap, like the AI is not a chatbot anymore. It's actually doing things in the real world. It's like getting my Uber Eats and it's like booking my plane tickets and it's like able to do these actual practical things. Like I think you could more viscerally feel how that leads to unemployment. Maybe it actually does like tick up unemployment in like a very small amount, but like in a large amount to be noticeable. And then I think, yeah, you're heading into the midterms. And like we're already seeing just this past year, there's been a lot of populist anti-AI sentiment. Like the data centers there's a claim that they're like using all the water. There's a claim that they're running up electricity prices. Like people are already on the watch for affordability. And I think they like don't like big tech. It's easy to blame the data centers for your problems. It's easy to blame big tech for your problems. And maybe you don't feel like you can really do anything about OpenAI or Facebook or something, but you definitely can do something about that data center in your neighborhood. And so like it is kind of a way for individuals to feel like they have some power over what's going on. And I'm expecting, yeah, politicians to continue to use that. I definitely think, yeah, like AI, it's already been kind of a big part of tech policy this past year. I think it'll be an even bigger part of tech policy in 2026. Unfortunately, I don't feel like we're going to really land on any actual solutions that get passed. I think kind of most midterm years tend to be fairly acrimonious and not really solutions oriented, and I think that's super unfortunate. And I want to work on that. I want to make sure that we're getting good use cases like Waymos, while of course not like running up way too much risk, like from AI run amok, like AI with no guardrails whatsoever, like a lot of big tech seems to want, but like finding somewhere in between, and like harnessing that anti-AI sentiment towards like more productive solutions seems like a really important thing to do this upcoming year.
Last one for me. Do you want to venture a year when I'll get a domestic service robot that will come into my house and do my laundry and cook my meals and make my coffee in the morning?
Yeah, great question. I mean, I think that like robotics has always been on the disappointing side, and I think there's also just like not really good evaluations for it. But I kind of have a sense that like like once robotics starts working, it will just like really start working. And so like we may just see kind of a lot of robotics progress kind of feel like it comes out of nowhere, sort of like I think how self-driving cars like weren't really economically viable for the longest time. Like I remember like even way back in 2015, I thought I might have a driverless car pretty soon, and that was like just wildly off. I wasn't a good forecaster back then. I was just a college kid. But like now we're finally seeing it happen about 10 years later. So like, I mean, I would venture maybe, yeah, by like the end of the 2030s, you have sufficient AI progress and sufficient follow-on robotics progress and sufficient reliability that, and also just like sufficient cost reduction that it's just like cheaper to hire the robot butler to come instead of the human butler. Obviously, I guess that would be like tremendous for individual consumers who then can like outsource a lot of their chores. I certainly would like that. Of course, that's like obviously very difficult for the American worker that would normally work that job. So yeah, there are definitely really important trade-offs there, and that's going to be a really important policy conversation for sure.
Yeah, feels to me like we're maybe 4 years behind in robotics compared to the chatbot. Like We got ChatGPT late 2022.
Yeah.
We're going to
Mhm.
start to see the first humanoids shipped to consumer homes next year, it seems like. They're probably not going to be great. They might have a sort of
Mhm.
Yeah.
GPT 3.5 level reliability. But if it keeps pace, then in a 2030, you can imagine getting AIs along the, getting robots that are sort of performing similarly as a like Claude 4.5 Opus, perhaps.
Yeah.
And that would be, while not necessarily perfect and able to do every last thing I might want in my home, that would definitely be a product I would be keen to sign up for, especially if it could bring
Yeah.
the character of Claude into my home.
Yeah, that would be super fun. Yeah, I mean, I think we haven't really seen the ChatGPT moment for robotics yet, but like, yeah, I mean, the ChatGPT moment was only 2-3 years before the Claude 4.5 Opus
Mhm.
moment. So yeah, I mean, definitely once you start hitting on something, it can be like very quick until it's like very, very useful.
I feel like the physical manufacturing, servos, etc., are actually in better shape than the AI used to control these things. Like there's a lot
I think
more.
that's
Yeah.
yeah. I mean, but one thing I did learn recently was I think like robots only have like 10,000 tactile sensors on their hands, which like sounds like an awful lot of sensors, and that is definitely a lot to cram into one robot hand. But I think humans have like only almost 1 million different touch points on their
Mhm.
hand.
Mhm.
And so yeah, there's just like still so much scaling to be done to meet human performance. Yeah, it really does speak to that Moravec's paradox that like, yeah, doing the dishes is just like so much more difficult than like doing a math competition when it comes to AI.
Yeah, it's incredible.
Well, that might be a great place to leave it, unless you have any other bold predictions you want to give us for 2026 or beyond.
Well, I'm hoping I'm predicting a successful live show and hoping you'll do another one next year. And I'm wishing everyone, yeah, a Merry Christmas or a Merry Happy Holidays of their choosing. If you're not
Yeah.
of the Christmas persuasion,
Indeed.
yeah, looking forward to it. Thanks for having me on.
Happy
Thanks for being
holidays,
here.
Peter.
Appreciate it, Peter. Happy holidays.
But
And
So
wow,
we've done it.
what a show! What a marathon!
I'm not even sure I can properly step back to reflect on it just yet, but
Yeah.
it was certainly fun.
It
And
was.
I do think we, up until the end there, where we kind of let the time with Peter go long, we at least
Well,
stayed
that
on
was
time.
that was
and-
by choice because
Yeah,
we'd been pressed for time the entire series. So we'd want every speaker you want to continue, and then you end up having to cut them off. So it's a tough one. I found Boris interesting. He's very charismatic. It reminds me that politicians are much more charismatic than tech people. Very charismatic. I tried to draw him out on the crypto stuff. He didn't bite. So I think that was interesting for me. Interesting moment. I found I think Dean was much more optimistic, I'd say. I found him like very optimistic. So that was good. That was a good differentiation from Zvi, who started off quite negative. And overall, it also struck me that one of the things that struck me was how many of the developments that we were talking about had really only happened in the last couple of months. Like the GPT 5.2, the 390x, cost improvement. That was just like a few weeks ago. Nested learning was not that long ago. It's really, when you talk to people about biotech, they talk about things that happened like a year ago or like 18 months ago, right? And you can really see kind of like how fast things are diffusing, at least from the research to the community, but perhaps not quite into the economy yet. And you could feel that. You could feel that. I could feel that everyone I think everyone on the show expected more, and still expects more for the next year, which I think is a little bit different from the market right now. The market thinks AI bubble, this is it, right? So the market has kind of flattened out expectations for the year. It's very interesting to watch to hear the insider views, which are quite different from what the market believes.
When it comes to the market, one thing I always wrestle with is, and I think actually Noah Smith had a pretty good write-up of this recently, where he was like, the tech is for real. You're not going to get a sort of bubble burst when it comes to what AI can do. Obviously, it can already do a lot, and it'll continue to do more. But that doesn't necessarily mean that there will be durable high profit margins for the companies that makes the financing of all this make sense, in the fullness of time. So I wonder how you think about that, because I'm kind of like pretty confident that we're going to get to some kind of, as Dean already, Tyler Cowen called AGI with O3. Dean is kind of soft calling it with Claude 4.5 Opus.
Yeah.
If we don't want to call it yet, I'm still confident we're going to get to something that will qualify.
Yeah.
But I'm not sure that, because and this is one thing I wanted to get to with Logan, but we didn't quite have time. It seems like switching costs are rising, but they're still not that big. And part of the reason, people maybe don't switch as much as they otherwise could is just because all the models are pretty cheap, or we're all, we're all benefiting from the competition. Nobody wants to be, dramatically undercut. So they're all pricing pretty low. But it does feel like we could see sort of progress continue, but also price wars continue to the point where maybe the economics of it do kind of go haywire, even as the capabilities, progress. Maybe not quite as fast as I predicted, but not necessarily too dissimilar. What do you think of that?
So one thing that strikes me is that the useful models may get smaller over time. Like Gemini 3 Flash, for example, is a breakthrough in efficiency. Obviously, like it's on par with 2.5 Pro, but it's so fast. It's obviously much more economic model to serve. And so that makes me think, okay, if you have a model that can do a software engineer's job today, but it requires a Blackwell chip, and in 12 months, you have a model that can do a software engineer's job, but it requires a H100 chip, meaning you go back in the chip, you get so much more efficient that you're using an older chip. Do you still make the same economic value from the software engineer, because it's the same work that's being done, like on the B100 or the H100 in 12 months? And so that speaks to me that this is what Jensen said. The H100s are still being used because as things get better, you are able to deploy more advanced, smaller models on older chips, and the economic value that those models are providing is still there. And that really confuses that I think really confuses a lot of the assumptions that people have. It's not that you need more, like better chips for more capability, but you can also serve the same capability with older and smaller chips. And that's something that we've seen even, for example, ArcAGI, the tiny recursion model was a 7 billion parameter model, so much smaller. And if the economic task was ArcAGI, I'm sure in 12 months you'd have a 7 billion parameter model, which was at 80% scoring equivalent to a 5.2 Pro, right? So over time, a job is a job. Like that software engineer's job is still being done. It's being done on an older, smaller chip. That economic value is being created. If you have a lot of software engineers, though, demand starts to, you get oversupply, obviously. But in a world where we have too few software engineers, and where software engineering creates a lot of value, and over time, this idiot index of our brains using 20 watts to produce a software engineer, and these models using 1 megawatt hour to produce a software engineer, and that we're closing that index, right? That idiot index is closing over time. And I feel like that means that you get more economic activity on older chips over time. And I think that is something that will become more apparent. You can see it in kind of like the booking numbers for like some of these firms with older chips. But I think it'll become more apparent by the end of next year, because I think there'll be more, Claude Code type software engineers out there, and creating more code. And that, I think, might be where you start to see, okay, this is real economic activity. Even if you spend on these data centers right now, they are actually going to be useful 6 years from now, because 6 years from now we will have so much better models, smaller models that we can still deploy on these chips, and we can still get economic growth out of them. I don't know. That's what I feel. What do you think?
So does that bottom line out to, you think the financing can be sustained because these things will have a long serviceable life, basically?
Yeah, I think so. I think like the way, for example, like a Meta thinks is that, if I get super intelligence, great. If not, we're going to generate lots of slop AI, and the slop AI, and they're definitely going to do personalized automated advertising. It's going to come. You're gonna open up your Facebook, and you may have like someone who looks very similar to your wife or your kid pitching you on a product. It's gonna get real, right? And video gen takes a lot of GPUs, and the economic benefits are going to be there for advertising. It's clear. Personalized advertising will come, and that is like a fallback position for these companies, for Meta, for Amazon. Worst case scenario, do slop ads, right? You have the economic benefits there. And that's how they think, right? They're like, they build out to support that they're not going to go bankrupt, and they can still build these things. Worst case, they go into junk bond territory. They live a few years with kind of junk bond type like credit ratings, but they're confident in their cash flows, because at this point, a lot of the economic activity in the US is now concentrated on these $10 trillion companies that are really kind of reshaping the global economy as we speak, right? So it does worry me that it's a one-way bet, though. It's a one-way bet for the entire US economy right now. There's no diversification anymore. It's all in on this. China is not doing that. China is diversifying into multiple other things. They're spending money on a lot of other stuff. It does worry me a little bit that it is a one-way bet, but you have people who are willing to gamble at the top, so they're gambling. So
yeah, that's maybe a great cliffhanger note to leave us on. Thanks for helping put this together. I really enjoyed getting to talk to 9 different leading experts, and I think there's obviously ample opportunity to do it more. I just made a little list of things that we didn't really cover. Mechanistic interpretability, opening up the black box, didn't touch on that at all. Alignment and control techniques, we basically didn't touch on at all. AI for science, we kind of alluded to a few times, but there are a functionally infinite number of experts at the intersection of AI and all these different sciences that we could be talking about.
There was
media gen, we didn't either. So
there are these people doing reinforcement learning with science, back and forth. That could be that's another thing that we didn't explore. Nathan, thank you. This was awesome. And yeah, let's see if we can do it again. Let's see what the responses are online. I'm very curious. So
let us know what feedback you have. If you made it this far, bless you, and we'll definitely be very interested in your feedback. Thanks, Prakash. This has been fun.
Thanks, Nathan. Cheers. Bye-bye.
Bye for now.